Cool. We're waiting on ball, I guess.
Hey, what's up, Eric?
Yeah, what's up? It's a lot of good talks, man. We should have a podcast.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah. Um, I think I added him, but where is he? Let me see if I can find him. I really wanted to hear him out because he said he's libertarian, and but he did seem like he. Yeah. I really want. I was curious on him. What's his name? Ball, right? Shit. Did I add him? Did you add him by any chance?
No, I didn't.
I don't even know if he added me. That's the problem. Um, that's some bullshit. Um, I was waiting on the can of worms he was about to
Yeah.
open up. Mm, 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 mm.
But as you were talking before, I noticed a theme, and I heard this back in the 2020 election or 2016, and the difference between the left and the right, even for a libertarian, is that Milton Friedman is trying to create a level playing field and let the, oh, there it is. There it is.
Sorry.
That's fine. Let the cards fall where they may. Where the left kind of thinks equality of outcomes is very important that people live long. Well, I'm not conceding on that. I don't necessarily think it's important for people to live long. I think a level playing field is better. But
So, welcome in, ball. I was waiting. I was waiting for the can of worms you were about to open, man.
No, no worries. Well, thanks for having me up. Yeah, it was a good discussion. I feel like I don't know. It's rare that people are kind of speaking about politics, right? Or the economy and kind of money theories or economic policies and stuff like that. Um, and yeah, I kind of appreciated what you guys were kind of saying. I guess in relation to like UBI and kind of just like the overall system, I view it more as like an right as opposed to anything, if that makes sense.
Sorry.
So for example, right,
Repeat.
R&D,
Repeat that again. Sorry.
100% deductible.
Uh-oh. Sorry. Repeat that again, because
Yeah, I was gonna say
missed out.
I view. Can you guys hear me?
yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say I view the tax policy as more of an incentive, right, to get people and customers to act in a certain way that the federal government generally deems as necessary in that moment or time. So right now, for example, with robotics, with AI, with all of these newer technologies, right, there's a strict emphasis from the federal government to reward businesses in that space that are trying to solve issues in that space. So, for example, right now, the Big Beautiful Bill, right, 100% of your R&D spend can be, I think it's either deductible, right, and that's something that's been increased from prior years, right? So there's a heavy emphasis from the federal government in that regard. Now, in relation to UBI, and you guys were kind of speaking about it, right? What does that look like? I guess question for you guys, right? What does that look like in terms of where people are funding that? How is the government making money to pay out UBI checks to individuals when, say, right, majority? So I'm more of I believe that AI is going to come eventually, and probably about 60-70% of jobs today that we see are going to be wiped away. Now, I don't necessarily know if it's going to create more jobs, right? Because most people, for lack of a better term, aren't necessarily as resourceful as they probably could be. What do you guys think happens there? How is the government being funded? what does that look like?
So I guess Milton and I have different opinions on this. Um, I'm pretty dead set on I'm pretty dead set um, on decreasing wasteful government spending first and foremost, right? And what I think is happening in America is that when it comes to especially the healthcare sector, right? It's a bunch of unnecessary expenditure because there's layers and layers and layers of costs that amount to the $5 trillion that America spends on that industry alone, right? So my position has been, and it also comes from like the Democrats' failure in California to really put a dent on homelessness, right? So essentially, what happened in California? Sorry, sorry. So what happened in California was that you had a whole bunch of government, like especially the Democratic government, creating all of these programs, creating all of these expenses to try to deal with homelessness. But at the end of the day, it's been 8 years of spending tens of billions of dollars, and it hasn't made a dent on the problem, right? And the issue is
But
that, go ahead.
would yeah, sorry to cut you off, right? But I I agree that there's been massive overspend there in California. From the research that I've done on that homelessness issue in California, I believe there's enough housing for all homeless individuals in California if they wanted to abide by the homeless shelters rules and regulations, right? So no usage of rugs, no usage of or like bringing in a dog or something like that, right? Like that's the research that I've found. So I'd say that that's been successful, although they've probably spent probably 10x in what it would cost, kind of if like a private individual would like to undertake that challenge, right? That's at least like what I've heard, or what like the low research I've heard about that issue, um, and that at the end of it, right, people just don't want to not be homeless, for lack of a better word, I guess.
So you mentioned you're a libertarian, right?
Yeah, yeah,
And my my understanding of libertarians, and maybe not all of them, is that they agree that drugs shouldn't be as controlled of a substance as they are, right? Or what do you call it? They're not. What do you call it? So my personal view on
shouldn't be as regulated. Yeah,
right,
yeah.
right. Like prohibition, I believe is a failure, right? It just adds on more to the problem, right? My issue with the homelessness is not really the drug use or specific individual cases of homeless people that would rather live in the streets than be controlled by
Sure.
the shelter, right? My issue is that when you're trying to throw money at this problem and you're trying to solve it in the market that is California, the housing market that is California, and to be more specific, the housing market that is Los Angeles and San Francisco and San Diego and Sacramento, it's not going to cost you $1,000 a month per homeless. It's going to cost you a few $1,000s a month per homeless individual, right?
Okay.
The issue is that how efficient is your government resource to actually solve the problem that you're seeking to solve, right? And earlier we were having a discussion on the cost of living of urban versus rural.
Yeah.
The spending power, the power that a dollar has in a rural economy is far greater than a city, right?
Agreed. Yeah.
So to me, the $1,000 a month is the more direct use of and more efficient use of government resources, rather than to allow California or any government, any government, doesn't matter what government, to create these layers of complications and cost and administrations and NGOs and salaries. Like one of the reasons why a lot of that money is unaccounted for is because all of a sudden, all of these NGOs started popping up to, they were like, oh, I'm gonna help solve the homeless person. So now you're gonna pay the fucking the nonprofit. You're gonna pay the salaries of the workers. It's not, the salaries aren't gonna be some cheap salaries. They're gonna be like $80,000 or even more than $100,000 per NGO employee, right? You're just adding layers and layers and layers, more layers to the issue, and that's to me what you have to address. And think about it this way: a lot of the homeless people, not all of them, but a lot of the homeless people, a good chunk of the homeless people that live in California right now, are not from California. They are from other states, right? And it begs the question, are we going to, first of all, are we not going to address that the demand of people wanting to live in metropolitan areas or certain regions, most specifically coastal cities, or famous metropolitan cities like Chicago and Denver and Houston and Austin and Dallas, are we going to ignore the fact that there's so much demand to live in these cities, further adding to the cost of living issue? Because I am a purist. I think that inflation there's nothing more to it than just supply versus demand. That's it. There's no other layers to it except supply and demand, right? Meaning that the more people want to live in California or New York, the more people are competing for a limited resource, or I wouldn't say a limited resource, but I would say a resource that is constrained, which is housing, and it further affects the market price in those regions, right?
Right.
And on the opposite end of that, if you go to rural communities in the Midwest, in the South, and to Milton's point, even if you leave LA and San Francisco and you go to Central California, you will definitely find more affordable housing there, right? But the cheapest housing you'll find in the landlocked states. You'll find the cheapest housing in a lot of the small towns in the Midwestern states, and a lot of the small towns and smaller cities in the South, right? So to me, that's the logic behind the universal basic income. Is for government, especially the Democrats, are trying to solve all of these social issues in wasteful and inefficient ways, and bless their heart because they have the right intentions, but it's just not working, right?
Interesting. So I've got a couple of questions on that, and actually, thank you for kind of walking me through your logic behind. It's interesting to think about, and I can definitely see it, right? I guess where I'm kind of cautious, and I'd love for you to touch on this, right? So, would social programs still exist, right? So for example, SNAP, universal healthcare, etc., right? Do you think that should still exist under a UBI type of system, or do you think that in that UBI it's enough to cover those basic essentials? Or kind of how are you thinking about that?
So a UBI is a way to consolidate a lot of these existing programs, right? When it comes to SNAP and EBT, I've heard that it doesn't even amount to $1,000 a month that people receive through those programs, right? I've heard that when it comes to SNAP, some people receive like $300 a month or something like that. I'm not too sure.
300, 400, yeah. 300,
Correct.
400, I believe. Yeah.
Correct.
Depending on your family size, I think.
So what you want to do, and on top of that, these existing government programs, these social welfare programs, have too much red tape. They have too many requirements. There's a lot of rules. There's income thresholds. Um, I want to get rid of all of those thresholds. I want to get rid of all those regulations and rules attached to them, right? When you create a less regulated social welfare system, well, first of all, you lessen the cost, right? Because who monitors today? Like who gets these social programs? Well, now you have to hire social workers, right? You have to hire social workers. You have to hire administrative people in government to administer SNAP, to administer EBT, to administer all of these social welfare programs, right? I want to get rid of that, all of that. The whole point of a UBI is to be a direct cash transfer to the citizens, right? So when it comes to that, you're consolidating all the existing social welfare programs. One of the only caveats is that if you are receiving like something like disability and you're receiving more than $1,000 a month, obviously if you're disabled, you have less capacity to hold a job or be a bit more productive than someone that's able. So you should be able to keep that dollar amount, right?
Okay.
Whatever it may be. But remember, where this money, a UBI, where it would excel is in the family. The right likes to always bring up the nuclear family, right? And I don't even think they support the nuclear family, right, with their policies. But a UBI would best support nuclear families when both adults in that household each get $1,000 a month, because a UBI is the only caveats are that you're a U.S. citizen, that you're 18 and over, you're a citizen 18 and over, and that's it. That's pretty much it, right? But when you have a household with mom and dad or whatever form your household takes, or even if you have multiple adults in a household, well, that amount, especially with, again, going back to families, I don't want to get too caught up with mom and dad or parents both receiving $1,000 a month. Well, that's a huge boost to their household income, right?
Would you not see cost of living increase, right, if UBI did exist then? Or do you think it would decrease the cost of living?
So when it comes to the cost of living issue, I truly think that it all stems from, okay, how do I put this? Where do you live in a city? First of all, do you live in a city?
I live in the Midwest, Omaha, Nebraska.
Okay, that's the capital of Nebraska, I guess.
Lincoln is the capital, but Omaha is the biggest city by quite a distance. Yeah.
Okay, and I assume that if you live in a city in Nebraska, the rent there is kind of almost pretty high, right?
Uh, uh, I would say since C-19 happened, yes, I would say we've seen quite a big uptick in the cost of living in terms of housing prices. So kind of your, I don't know, right, your 20 or let's just say 15,000 square or 1,500 square foot house probably was around 300,000, right? So new house, whatever, 300,000 ish. Today probably about 400, 410, 415.
Okay.
So we've seen quite a big lift, and I think we're kind of on track. We've seen a lot of people kind of moving into Omaha, Nebraska,
Yeah.
over the last few years as well. But yeah, I would say that it's probably the more expensive city in Omaha, Nebraska, or Nebraska as a whole. Although I wouldn't necessarily say some of the smaller towns are far off either. So it's still a lot more affordable than your coastal cities or high cost of living areas.
Correct.
But I wouldn't say it's low cost of living here anymore, at least.
And you mentioned housing, and you mentioned houses, right? You mentioned $30,000
Yeah.
to rent off. There, I assume there are apartment complexes in Nebraska and Omaha.
They are. They are. Yeah. Yeah. So I can even touch on that, right? So I lived in a what would be considered like a luxury apartment. So probably, decently new apartment. Moved there, 2019, kind of right before the end of the year. I don't do that anymore. We have a mortgage now, but at the time it was a 2 bedroom, 2 bath. 1,200 is what we were paying my brother and I. Today, yeah. Well, when we moved out in 2021 of those apartments, it was going to be renewing for 1,500, and I believe today it's around 1,800 for those apartments.
Okay. Yeah.
So a pretty big steep
Right.
increase over there. Yeah.
Right. And just to also to kind of make this point, in LA, that's double for that, right? It's doubled. It's
Oh,
about
at least probably triple. Yeah.
right. Yeah. No. Exactly. And that's the point of this. First of all, the lesson I learned from LA specifically is that when there was a large influx of people moving to LA, the standard the standard for homes here in LA was a single family housing unit, right? It was the fact that you had whether I don't know if people are familiar with LA, but it's very suburban, right? You have the valley, you have a lot of smaller cities in surrounding LA areas, and the norm was always the single family housing unit, right?
Yeah.
You are constraining the housing market when you only build for those types of housing, right?
Okay.
Right. And so what LA did was, I would say they were a bit late on this because they started building more apartment complexes in the last 5 to 6 years or something like that. I think I remember before C19, I started barely seeing projects uh, getting started in certain parts of the city, and now after C19, they started putting in extra work, and they started building more apartment complexes. The only issue with that is that they should have done that when the real estate market wasn't at the levels that it is right now, right? They should have done this in 2012 or 2014 or 2009, right? Because if they would have done it back then, the real estate market was a lot cheaper, and they wouldn't have spent as much money as they have now. The problem now is that now if you try to rent from these apartment complexes, they have a specific ROI. They have a specific return on investment that they need to meet because they spent so much
Right.
money on these things. And even if you have more apartments opening up, the asking price is fucking crazy, right?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
like literally
That's
like
insane.
$5,000, right?
Yeah. I think I can see somewhat like the use case of like subsidizing, if that were to happen on like a national scale, right? Um, right, because yeah, I'm a little bit of like a pessimist with like what's going on right now. I think there's just so much change going on with kind of the rate in which most corporations are laying off employees, the amount of news and information that we're being fed, AI technologies, robotic technologies, drone technologies, etc. And then kind of what that means for people, right? And I think we're moving more towards a lot more unrest. So so it's interesting, right? Like I'm not necessarily, you know, I'm not affiliated with like one party per se. I just kind of like to stick to facts, for example, or like I don't necessarily focus on a whole lot of like social issues because I think there's not a whole lot that I personally can do about like social issues, right? I believe that, right, economics is a lot more straightforward, right? We can react on it, right? So I can tailor, like if I have an LLC, I can tailor that LLC to like what's in the big beautiful bill, for example, right? Like that's a lot more like controllable aspects. Um, I guess like my one caveat there is that I've seen a lot more people directionless. And I guess like it's important for people to be, uh, in my eyes, contributing to society, not only for themselves but for the betterment of the country as a whole. And I've seen a degradation of that, largely, right, in recent years. Really, I'd say I think amplified by C-19, right. So now you see people aren't able to afford a house, a lot sooner, right. So I think the average age now is like 38. Before C-19, it was like 28, right. So that's 10 years in a 5 year span, right? And I don't think any party is necessarily addressing this, and that's my issue with like government, right? I think government shouldn't be in control of as much as it is today, because I think when government's in control, I think there's actually a big lag, right, in terms of how quick government reacts to technologies, right?
Yeah.
It's expecting someone who knows very little about a certain industry to react very quickly about industries that really, right, is just moving a lot quicker than it is, or that than what they're able to react to. So for example, I don't think the government has a good contingency plan for what's happening with AI and the amount of layoffs that's happening, right? Amazon, for example, 30,000 corporate employees, right? These aren't kind of your lowest skill employees kind of thing, right? Or kind of jobs that are, right, most people could apply to, right? They're very tailored, they're very specialized and everything like that. What happens to individuals who got laid off, right? Some of them will probably find employment elsewhere. They'll be fine. I would probably say, right, 70% of them will probably be fine. The other 30% probably moves into other sectors, right? And that amplifies the competition in other sectors. So I agree. I actually think, and trust me, I hate government getting involved in certain things, but I think the government, maybe they are prepared for it, right? But I would hedge on saying that they're not prepared for a lot of these changes, and that's my issue. Is, hey, how do we kind of get ahead of it, right? I'm doing relatively okay for people my age. We own a house. We don't have a whole lot of debt. We buy a whole lot of debt. I mean, we just have our cars, right? Which we just got a new car, or whatever, and that's by choice, right? But yeah, the average 28-year-old is not like me. I'm well aware of that, right? And so I guess that's just my way of saying, right? Like I agree. I think we need some sort of like a UBI system, although I don't know if I'm fully on board with it yet. I think it's more of like a state by state situation. So I think if like you're in the Bay Area, you probably need some sort of support, right? I would argue at least like San Fran area over there, right? I don't know where I'm going with this, but like I guess like I just think, yeah, society,
So
at least America as a whole, is kind of at an interesting place.
okay, I don't know, Milton. I don't know if you wanted to chime in. I don't know.
Yeah, Milton Friedman talks about a negative income tax, and one important thing that I like to say is that the UBI, or the poverty relief mechanism, has to be tied to the private property mechanism, because
Can you?
if
Yeah.
I'm not allowed to break into your house, then you owe me a piece of bread, so to speak.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Ball.
No, I was going to ask Milton, can you touch more on that? So you said it has to be tied to the private property aspect of it. Can you give like a more layman's term example of what you mean there?
Yeah. So in the Constitution, right, if you notice, the states were mostly there to administer the functionings of society, where the federal government was there to ensure defense at a couple of post offices. it could levy taxes. It had a couple limited powers, but in general, all these social programs that we're talking about were administered by the state.
Right.
Okay, so on the state level, the private property mechanism must be tied to the welfare state, meaning that whoever, so you have a sheriff in your town, right?
Right. Right.
And if you're going to levy a tax that's going to put me in jail for burglarizing your house, then you owe me a piece of bread. Because if you want to be a true libertarian, what if I'm really good at breaking into houses? Why is that activity forbidden in your system? Right? I guess I'll answer a question with a question. Why is it okay to levy a tax to stop me from robbing banks, but it's not okay to levy a tax to set up soup kitchens?
So, to your point, you're saying that you're tying it together with uh, private property. You're referring to like a land tax or a land value tax or a property tax?
No, what I'm saying is that you have to escape hypocrisy. If
Okay.
you levy a tax that stops me from robbing banks,
Right. So you need to allocate some of that money from that tax to go to feed and cover certain necessities of the people that could potentially rob the bank or rob your house.
yeah, and
Okay.
I would argue it only starts with food, but
Right. Right.
but
Um.
yeah,
So Ball. I really want to touch more on the homelessness thing, right? Because it's about the purchasing power of the dollar and how far the dollar would go, whether you live in a city versus when you live in a rural part of a rural region of a country, right? So to me, I am with I'm with Milton and a lot of conservatives and libertarians in that we have to figure out the most cost effective way to enact the universal basic income. Now, Milton and I disagree with the amount of a universal basic income, but but I do agree with the fact that we have to find that sweet spot, and we have to find we have to find a way to not break the bank, right? So at the end of the day, the impact that $1,000 a month will have if you live in LA or San Francisco or New York, it's very very small, right? Just off of rent alone, right? Just off of rent alone. Fuck, if you, yeah, right,
Yeah.
right. If you're renting a $4,000 apartment, that's just a quarter of your rent. That's insane, right? But when you go to places where you're at right now, and even if you go further, even within Nebraska, and you go further into rural places, the cost of living drops, right? And you notice the difference a lot sooner because even if I live in a city like LA or San Francisco, I would still have to travel more than I would have to travel more than 100 miles to find more affordable housing and apartments, right?
Right. Right.
Whereas for you living in Omaha, I am guessing that you would probably travel 10 to 25 miles to find more affordable housing.
Oh yeah, it's yeah, 30 minutes, whatever at the most. 30 minutes, yeah, you could basically buy property, live more of a rural lifestyle, still commute into the city and all of that type of stuff. Yeah.
Now, I feel like that's where the potential lies. That's where you can really see this idea take off, right? Because My understanding of modern economics is the fact that we haven't really paid attention to the effects of urbanization, right? The effects of urbanization. Go ahead.
No, I was 100% agreeing
Oh
with you.
yeah,
Yeah, I don't think we have.
yeah. So the effects of urbanization is the fact that people will flock to the cities from rural areas and from smaller cities because that's where you have the you have the dream or you have the you have better opportunities, you have better paying jobs, you have better industries, you have stronger industries, and all of these things, right? And you're creating two problems right there. You're creating the fact that you're further affecting the cost of living in the cities because you're raising demand, right? Think about New York and LA and San Francisco, and you're also sucking away human capital from those rural communities, the smaller cities or the smaller towns, right?
Right. Right.
If you really, really want to get to the crux of the problem, it comes down to economic opportunities. That's it. That's literally it, right? Because I can tell someone, hey, guess what? It's very affordable to find a house in like, Alaska or in, Nebraska. And they're gonna be like, yeah, but what am I gonna do there? Right?
Right.
Like I can literally tell someone, hey, you can find a $600 house in the middle of nowhere. And they'll be like, yeah, it's cheap, but once I get there, what am I gonna do? Right?
Yeah. Yeah. No, you're 100% right on that. Although I would say generally the lifestyle preference of individuals living in rural America comes into the play too, right? So people, at least here, right? So between Omaha and Lincoln, which are the two biggest cities in Nebraska, it's a 45-minute drive between the two cities, right? So so in a city like, or in a state like California, right, it's almost like those cities are kind of joined. Over here, you probably got about 20 minutes where, right, your cornfields kind of thing, right? So
Right.
so there's a lot of space.
Right.
Um, but people opt for that lifestyle a little bit more, right? So you could get the urbanization by living downtown or living closer towards downtown, or you can move out west, where you kind of have a little bit more land space, right? So you have your acreage, you have your 3 acres, and all of that type of stuff. You've got a few neighbors here and there, and that's kind of it. Or you could even move further out where you've got no neighbors and you have farmland, right? And people prefer that lifestyle a
Yeah.
little bit more. My wife works with people who drive literally 2 hours to work in Nebraska. Yeah, exactly, right? Because they prefer the extreme country lifestyle, right? They've got multiple acres of land. They don't want to give it up, right? Land, especially I think in the Midwest and kind of your smaller states, becomes extremely valuable and has some sort of like an emotional attachment as well to individuals.
So my argument for those individuals that are having to travel 2 hours a day, holy shit, that's crazy. My
Insane.
huh?
No, I was saying it's insane.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh, and trust me, I see that a lot here where I'm at.
Okay.
Okay. Uh, Remote work was a game changer during C19, right? I don't know why corporations are adamant about having to rent out office spaces. I get it. Some people prefer going to the office, others don't. That's fine, right? But when I think about this issue and when I think about automation, I think about how a UBI is the economic stimulus that Omaha and Nebraska and Alaska and Ohio and Wyoming, it's the economic stimulus that these states and these rural places need to see job creation there, right? I had the opportunity when I was younger as a teenager. I lived in a small town. right, in a small rural town about 40 minutes away from a city, right, in a Latin American country.
Okay.
I still remember, and I can still romanticize. I still have a very, very beautiful idea in my head of living in a small town, right? What that means is that you have a bustling small town with so much freedom, especially when it comes to kids, right? When it comes to being a kid and being able to walk to the local basketball court and like
Right.
go to the local small little they had these small little boxes where some lady would sell like sandwiches and like sodas and it was a bustling town, and the economy revolved very similar to a lot of Nebraska. There was a lot of agriculture, but there was also small businesses, or I would rather say family businesses, right? You
Yeah.
you had a home, and attached to the home was a building to open up a small mom and pop store, right? Like a small barber or like a tortilla factory or
Right.
artisan workers and all these different things, right? What I see in the future of work, and of course a UBI will help make this very possible in those rural communities, is to give back that those resources so that you can have a very active and bustling economy in those rural regions, right?
Sure.
I don't I don't I don't know how well it would work in American rural towns, but I mean, come on. I mean, there's so many movies and there's so many media and images of like small towns with the small, the local barber and like the local liquor store, or I don't know. Dude. It's just you get what I'm saying, right? That
Yeah, yeah. I think though, right, like in terms of like modern economics, the way that a lot of the world, I think, in terms of at least in America, right, a lot of the corporations make moves based on assurances from the city, right? So is the city going to fund X project for them to move there, or are they going to get certain tax breaks for moving out into a certain area, right? I think that plays a significant role in terms of where a company moves, right? Amazon is a really good example of this, where they build certain warehouses and things of that nature.
correct.
Um,
So
I,
you
I
go ahead.
yeah. See, I struggle with it, right? Because I've Omaha is a very weird place, right? We've got basically a lot of your big tech over here. So we have Facebook, Google, Amazon, Yahoo, LinkedIn, all of those kind of companies, right, out here. But what you'll find as well now is there's generally quite a bit of pushback in terms of right into those cave into those corporations.
I'm sorry. There's a
Is what's kind
pushback.
of happened.
There's a pushback in terms of what? Sorry, you cut off.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I was saying there's a slight pushback there, right? When corporations or people move into your area and they want to change the way that things have been done there. So there's that human tendency. Um, but Nebraska has historically low unemployment, right? Although I'd say like the types of jobs that people do here with AI or something of that nature can decimate the unemployment rate very quickly, very very quickly. Like ag is obviously massive for the state of Nebraska, right? Agriculture, um, and and right with robotics, with improved technologies, right, that could decimate the types of jobs that people are doing here. So agriculture, manufacturing, etc. I wouldn't necessarily say it's like a San Francisco where people are actively creating the newest technologies, right? It's more of a either your agriculture, manufacturing, corporate type of thing, and that's the Nebraska economy kind of thing, right? And so it would be interesting, right, with what you're even touching on. right, how that would play out in rural America, right? Because rural America generally, right, you guys have seen some stuff on television, I'm sure, where rural America wants to stay the way it is, right?
Yeah,
People choose to live in rural America, I would say, for the most part,
I agree.
right? And people choose to live in the mega cities for the most part too, I would say as well, right? But I would say, yeah, one of the biggest reasons that people remain in the Midwest is because of, um, yeah, just like your things that you wouldn't necessarily get in a major city, right? So you have a larger property than you would over there at a cheaper amount, right? You have less traffic, right? You have less crime per se, right? You things of that nature, right? Where it's a lot more friendly. I had a job offer in Seattle, and the main reason for turning that down was the cost of living over there, right? Most beautiful place that I've probably been in the United States, right? Pacific Northwest, whatever. But
It's
I
amazing.
just couldn't fathom paying double the amount I have. We have a a three bedroom house right now, two bathroom with a unfinished basement right now, which is 1,200 square feet. The unfinished basement, right? So, right, we do that. We probably add in about 30 to 50K in terms of property valuation. For our house, we're paying 1,900, right? And and I can just imagine if we were to move out to Seattle, I think we were seeing apartments for like 30 something hundred, right? And so and so there's that aspect over there, but I just don't necessarily think that it's attainable, right? For and I do actually think eventually, right, the Midwest is going to see the next explosion in terms of city size. I think it's the natural progression of cities or whatever, and just kind of the stage we're at. But I guess like my pushback over there would be, hey, what happens when people start losing their property, right? So I think yes, right. You have farmers, for example, and I think you've got some sort of like a monopolization of corporations. So for example, right, in the Midwest, we always talk about beef is going to be very important, very critical to the market. We've seen some sort of a consolidation of like meat packing or producing businesses, right? So your Cisco, I think your I'm forgetting one big what Tyson is another one, right, etc. You see that happen frequently, and so I just don't necessarily and I love your guys' take on this, right? But what happens with like a few big conglomerates really driving the market and the prices of certain goods within a specific location or even multiple different states, right? And and that's where even as like a libertarian, right? I think capitalism is the best system, hands down. I think it's the only one that works today. I think it's the most powerful, etc. But I think the onus is on the government to ensure that everyone is playing a fair game, right? I think that's the limited scope that the government should have, right? That no one corporation or no certain industries are abusing the powers that they have because of the amount of resources that they have. And I don't necessarily think I've seen that. And so even though I don't fully agree with individuals who kind of oppose the capitalism system, I could see why people, for example, Zoran Magani is a very good example of that, right? Why is he such a popular candidate, right? I wholeheartedly disagree with all of these talking points for the most part.
So,
But there is a reason why people are resonating with an individual like that over there.
yeah.
And I think and I don't necessarily think either side is even like talking about it per se, right? I think it's just more of, hey, he's a labeling him as like a communist or socialist or whatever it might be. But um, yeah, I think there's a reason why people are feeling entitled to vote for someone like that.
Now, okay, because I wanna, I don't want to get too off tangent, right? But um, give me a second gather my thoughts. Milton, did you want to add something in the meantime?
Um, the only thing I want to say is that you're you're kind of leftist and you're solving the problem backwards from me. Not that it's necessarily wrong, but you're
Okay.
looking at you're oh, no, I'm talking to host.
Oh,
Right.
And I'm saying you're looking at problems and trying to solve them, which is fine. But the Austrian school works on axiom priori. And what axiom priori means, it's a truth that you kind of have to concede without evidence. And that truth is when two people trade, they both think they're benefiting. When I give you $1 for your apple and you give me the apple and we exchange $1 for an apple, it's assumed without evidence that that is always beneficial. That is the foundation of capitalism. Now, if you want to talk about Jack and the Beanstalk, right, we can get a little philosophical on it. But it's from that, it's from the axiom priori that free trade is the best, that then we there derive soup kitchens and private property mechanism and the actual functions of government. And I want to do a thought experiment with you and talk about Port-au-Prince, Haiti, right? You know what's going on in Port-au-Prince right now?
IT?
IT?
No, I don't. I'm not sure. I'm sorry.
You know the Caribbean island, Haiti.
Yeah, yeah. Sorry, I pronounced it wrong. Yeah, yeah. I don't know
Oh,
what's going on. Sorry.
oh,
so yeah, in Port-au-Prince, it's anarchy right there. So as we're talking about UBI, you got you kind of got to think to yourself, well, how do you set up a UBI in Port-au-Prince? It is literal anarchy right now. There are factions who are vying for control of that city, and it sounds a little what's the word a little high on your horse to talk about UBI in Los Angeles. Let's work from the start, right? And that's Port-au-Prince, Haiti, right? It seems ridiculous to say, well, how do you set up a UBI in Port-au-Prince, Haiti? So the actual that as you're talking, you're describing all these problems and trying to engineer them away, which is okay. But the libertarian thinks from the other side, and we work off principles. And the first principle is if I trade you an apple for $1, that's as good as it gets.
Okay. When it comes to a place like Haiti, there is chaos there. I think that's what you're implying, right? That there is
Yeah,
chaos there. Right?
anarchy.
Anarchy. Well, I like the word chaos better, right?
Okay.
Because I'm going to use chaos because it implies that there's a lack of infrastructure. It implies that there's a lack of sort of either government. Well, there's a lack of government, I guess. What I would say on that is that Haiti has been plagued by poverty since its inception, right? Haiti has been plagued from poverty because the rest of the countries weren't too happy about Haiti gaining independence. This is all historical. There's a lot of, I don't want to get too deep into it,
Yeah,
but
I know the history.
right. From the very beginning, Haiti had a lot of blockades. They weren't able to establish trade relationships with key players in the world economy. There was a lot of racism, implied in why they weren't favored. And then you have the Dominican Republic right next door, that was the opposite of that, right? I think that I would really want to, maybe at another date, I would want to explore what a UBI means on a global stage, because that's something I really, really, really do want to explore. It's something that I'm actually kind of passionate about that. I don't want to stop on just U.S. politics. I really, really want to find a way to, apply this same system in different environments, right, around the world, right, and that would require a lot of other discussion. One thing I would say on that topic right now is that the cost of living in Haiti is definitely much cheaper than the cost of living in the U.S. So when it comes to purchasing power that the dollar has, or the currency has, it definitely, you have to address the fact that your dollar is gonna be far more valuable and be able to achieve far more in Haiti. So when you have a UBI in Haiti, it's not gonna be $1,000 a month. It's gonna be like $50 a month for every adult, or 100, if that, right? And that's the beauty about a UBI. It really has to do with the different size economies in different regions. In the U.S., I'm talking about rural versus urban, right? But if you go on the world stage, the rural, is much more widespread, right? I mean, if we go to Africa, um, and not just that. I'm sorry. It's just that the purchasing power of the dollar, or how far that dollar goes in different countries, will vary. I can think about the Philippines as well, that is going through a lot of poverty. Um, a lot of Latin American countries. But I don't want to get too sucked into that, because I feel like that would be best left for a different live. What I do want to explore, though, and one thing I did want to touch, is that Ball was mentioning, that he, what is it? It's the rural lifestyle versus the urban lifestyle, right? Um, there's a couple things I want to touch, and I'm gonna try to prioritize. Okay, first of all, I agree with Ball that there's a lot of rural places in which the local communities are very dead set in that way of life not changing, right? So I guess that sort of poses a challenge when it comes to my vision of economic development and growth in those areas. But I still don't see it as a huge challenge, because, like you said, Bob, many people prefer whatever it is that they, whatever it is that they're, whatever it is that the individual likes, right? So I know plenty of people that, despite how expensive it is in New York, they're not gonna budge from New York. They're gonna stay there till they die, right? Same with LA, same with San Francisco. Um, or even if it's not in those cities, I mean, they just love the city life, and they're just gonna want to live in the cities, right? So that means that that if you are if you want to address, these issues of, overpopulation in the cities and the cost of living in the cities, and remember, we were talking about homelessness in the beginning, right? And I mentioned that a lot of homeless people weren't from these cities. They're not from LA. They're not from San Francisco. They're not, even during the hippie revolution. Like, there were so many people coming from other states because they were enthralled with the movement, and they ended up going to San Francisco. And Hayden Ashbury was full of wild children and all of that. Whatever. The point of the matter is that if you want to address like a problem like homelessness, you have to be honest with yourself and be like, if you want your money to actually solve the problem of homelessness, you're going to have to start talking about economic mobility. And economic mobility, to me, it alludes to de-urbanization, meaning that if you're struggling to live in a city If you're living in a toxic situation, living in a city like LA or New York because of how expensive it is, or if you're homeless, or if you just started a family and you find it very hard to raise kids in this inner city with all of the inner city issues, um, I feel like that UBI will give people the economic mobility to move to those less expensive markets. Um, I don't think that everyone will make the move straight to those rural farm towns. I don't know. I feel like that takes a bit of adjustment to actually move from a city to those farmlands. Uh, but it does mean that places like Omaha, Nebraska, places like other cities in the Midwest, in the South, have to learn the lesson that I mentioned about LA, and they have to start building multifamily apartment complexes, right? They have to start doing that right now and take advantage that the price on land isn't very expensive there, right? And this kind of takes me to another point I really really want to get. It's a very sensitive subject, but I'm gonna try to be delicate about this. I don't know if you guys remember the show Malcolm in the Middle.
Oh yeah.
Right. Malcolm in the Middle, to me, was an amazing show because I used to, when I was a kid, I always lived in the. It was a five, there was five people to my immediate nuclear family. It was my parents and my brother and my sister, and we were all living in a one-bedroom apartment. And then, I'm watching Malcolm in the Middle, and I'm like, wow, that's an upgrade right there, right? It's like, it's very similar to my situation because remember they had how many children? 6 children. It was it was like 6 children that they had, right? And so that means that the kids had to share a bedroom, and it was the point of the show was that it was like this lower middle class family that was facing they were still middle class in that they had a home, they were living in the suburbs, but they were struggling, right? They were struggling, right? Now, my point is this. America has been enamored with the single family housing unit, meaning the suburban house. And don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to imply that that's bad. No, not at all. I'm not implying that suburban life is bad. What I am going to say though is that the lesson that LA had to learn the hard way was that we were not prepared for the influx of people that moved to LA. And when it comes to the human population size, it is a trend that only goes up, right? The human population size is only going up. So where I want to transition to the sensitive part of this topic is that if that Malcolm in the Middle family had 6 children, and let's say they didn't live in California, they lived in Omaha, Nebraska, and they had 6 children, and you look around your immediate housing market, and you're like, how am I going to find housing for each one of these 6 children in this region, right? And I think that's a problem that you can apply to inflation globally or locally, it doesn't matter. The fact of the matter is that and this is a discussion I had with Milton last night, is that I truly believe that the inflation markers go hand in hand with the population markers, and they both go up at the same time. And if we are to believe that automation is going to decimate jobs, and think about housing as a supply that we're all competing for, right? Housing is a supply that we are all competing for. give that same meaning, give that same, apply the same logic to jobs. Jobs are it's a resource that we are all competing for, right? If automation is to teach humanity a lesson, is that we need to start thinking about quality, not quantity, right? Either way, developed nations, or I'm sorry, as nations develop, as their economies develop, as the quality of life develops, people automatically tend to have less children. They tend to have, if you grew up in a rural farm town, you can probably see, like, especially during the olden times, you probably saw people having 6 children or 7 or 8. As time went on, and people probably moved to more urban centers, they started having three children or 4 or something like that, or 2 or 3, 2 to 4 children, right? And the reason why I think this topic is a delicate subject is because either you are increasing the supply of the resource that people are fighting and competing for. And again, keep in mind that this includes both housing and employment and jobs, right? Or we start thinking about the overall population size and how that is affecting our economy and our way of life and how we view the world, right? So I'm not talking about, again, it's a sensitive subject because people will allude to, oh, you're talking about population control. Oh, you're talking about forced policies like the one-child policies. No, I am not. But the thing that I see right now is that there is a lack of courage to bring up these topics and have an open and honest dialogue about it. Because to me, going back to the Malcolm in the Middle example, you have this very picture perfect life of owning a home, right? But then you're bringing in, according to Malcolm in the Middle, 6 children. Can you offer that same quality of life for every one of those 6 children? Especially in a housing market as expensive as it is right now to build those units, right? So, I always, one of the things I promote is having children at a later age, not when you're 20, but when you're 30, having less children, because if you have less children, it's quality over quantity. Not only that, but you're able to pour more resources per individual child, right? If you have 6 children, it's hard to distribute your resources as a parent to satisfy every single one of those 6 children. And remember, in a modern life, a resource could be things like paying for college, right? How are you going to be able to pay for six kids' college tuition? Right, and that's just the marker I use, right? You could use other markers, right? But I truly believe that inflation is tied directly with population size, and automation should be challenging all of us to think about the future of humanity and how we go about this, because we're already seeing these issues. We're already seeing housing cost an arm and a leg. We're already complaining that we can't afford the house. Our generation can't afford houses like the past generations were able to afford, right? And just again, look at the population size, right? I have the utmost empathy because I want to offer every single individual on Earth, or let's not go that far, on this country, the basic necessities of housing and food and water, right? But that is a challenge right now, because even amongst Milton Friedman and I, we can't even come to agreement with how much a UBI would look like, right? Like, Milton says that $1,000 is too much. I think it's, I think it's too little, but I think it should be enough. There's other people that are going to be like, yeah, $1,000 a month is not enough. So which is it? Is it too little? Is it the right amount? Or is it not enough? Right? Or is it too much? I mean, I don't know what I said. So my whole narrative is to challenge people's preconceived notions of society, of economy, of whatever, right? Because we are not living in the 20th century anymore. We are living in the 21st century. And that comes with a whole different set of challenges that we never saw in the 20th century, right? And again, AI and automation, that's the catalyst. That's the catalyst for massive change. And, I leave the floor open to whoever wants to jump on.
Milton, I don't know if you wanted to add anything. I guess if I'll go real quick here, Milton, but I guess, yeah, I think I generally, I don't know, I understand a lot of the sentiment, and I think this is where I think there's just fundamentally like some sort of like a disagreement potentially, right? Like for example, I think Nebraska, for example, right? We could build single family homes probably for the next, I don't know, 50, 60 years, be okay. I think, yeah, and I'm not necessarily too familiar with like a California, right? But I'd imagine that there's parts of California that are still pretty desert, and where there's a bunch of land for like single family homes, right? I just don't necessarily think builders have been incentivized to build single family homes, right? Their return is a lot higher when it comes to multifamily homes, and their ROI is just naturally going to be a lot higher that way. And I think we've seen a shift where, I think in today's market, in today's world, right, apartments are just going up left, right, and center, or you're finding home builders who basically build the whole community, right? There's no real in between. I mean, obviously there is, right, but it's going to be a lot more costly than most people can necessarily afford. And then the whole aspect of community as well, right? I think land for as long as possible, like for as long as humans have been around, right, was like the foundational aspect, right? Each family had their own piece of land. It was theirs to look after, to take care of, to make more prosperous, etc. Right? That includes kind of having, something that is linked to your family lineage for as long as possible. We've gotten away from that as well, right? And that's because of, right, inheritance tax is one of those big things. You look at the sizes of families' properties and how that's diminished, right? Because, right, someone passes away, the next
Did he cut off?
inheritance tax, the only way to get to cover that tax is to sell a part of the land, right? Oh, okay. Yeah, I was going to say the only way to pay for some of that tax is really just to sell parts of the land to the banks, to the government, whatever it might be, right? And I think that's also like a way that we've kind of moved away from that. But yeah, in terms of kind of population density, social mobility, and everything like that, I don't know, and it would be interesting to look at it, right, to kind of see where it's at today. I would imagine, like previously, before, if you moved to one of the biggest cities, you'd probably be guaranteed to kind of socially move upward. I don't know if that's the case today, right? I would maybe think that it's almost like the reverse of it, right? You move to a bigger city, doesn't necessarily equal kind of moving upwards socially. I think in today's market, right, remote work has probably made it a little bit more easier to have somewhat of like social mobility in terms of kind of living in a low cost of living area or kind of middle cost of living area kind of thing, right? But yeah, it's just really interesting, and yeah, I don't know, like my brain has been definitely turning just hearing you guys talk, so I'm definitely appreciative for this conversation. But yeah, I'll land there.
Yeah, for sure. Peapod, just your age and where do you stand on the political spectrum?
Yeah, hello. 35.
You sound muffled.
Sorry, 35. I would say more on the left.
And did you want to make a comment on the prompt or on what?
No, I think I'm just listening for right now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll catch you up to what we're talking about and what the main theme is. Yeah. If you could mute because there's a little bit of
Oh, sorry.
if you want to talk, you could comment or just unmute. But we are talking. The theme of the talk is a universal basic income, and I am going to cover it really quick. The universal basic income is a government cash transfer program. It's like a monthly stipend that the citizens receive from the government. I use Andrew Yang's system, which Andrew Yang was a presidential candidate in 2020. The way he saw universal basic income was $1,000 a month for every U.S. citizen over the age of 18, right? That's it. That was the only requirement. Doesn't matter if you were employed or unemployed. There was no real income threshold at all. It's just everyone gets it. Now, the whole point of this talk is to explore this, and I was touching on housing and how expensive housing is in the cities versus rural areas. I think, give me 1 second. So Ball was basically talking about, he lives in a Midwestern city. I live in a coastal city. I live in California. We're comparing both states, Nebraska and California or whatever. And also we're just kind of hashing it out. Like, what does this look like? What does a UBI look like? How do we make it possible? What are some questions you might have? If you have questions, you're always welcome to ask them.
I think there are ways to make it a reality, right? I think there, especially now with the emergence of AI, as well as like the data centers that are being built up. I think there are programs that I think should be enacted to ensure that workers are guaranteed a certain, or not just workers, I guess any American citizen is guaranteed some level of income. If we're talking about like the, we're talking about like an entire restructuring of the social fabric of the United States in general, right? And so, if we're talking about that, like, I think this is a great idea, but is it feasible? Is it an actual reality? I don't know.
Right, and that's
I think we are pretty far from this being a real idea, given the state of the United States right now, and where we are politically.
And I have
even people who would benefit from it, I think, would fight tooth and nail to prevent it from happening. Which
that is very true. Actually, that is very true. Now I have two questions for you. Just two questions, and then I'll move it on to Milton. What region do you live in the U.S. and what is
DC?
I'm sorry.
I live in DC.
Okay, and what industry do you work in?
I work in IT.
Okay, All right, fair. Um, I'm gonna move it on to Milton to see if he wants to add anything.
Yeah, a couple things you were saying from a while back is that it's back to the left versus the right. And the worldview that we have that's different is man, man starts from poverty, right? Man is, he's a farmer first, right? And you're kind of looking at the city and trying to solve those problems, but you have to make sure that the farmer is getting his just dues, not not the bum in Los Angeles, so to speak. We'll solve that problem eventually, but you seem to think that people are owed a certain way of life where man is born into. There's nothing wrong with a man living in a homeless encampment in LA, right? It's bad for him, it's not good, but inherently, there's no good reason why we need to solve that. We can and we will, because it's bad. But that's what the axiom priori is about. My pinnacle is when I trade you for an apple and a dollar, both people are happy, right? But your pinnacle is no one should be living on Skid Row. And I'm not going to concede that to you. I want to get them off. I don't like them living on Skid Row. But you're saying, as a fundamental principle, living on Skid Row for one reason or another is bad. And I disagree with that.
So, I would argue that. Okay, I'll start with where I agree with you. To what I agree with you to a certain extent. I agree with you that poverty. I grew up in like sort of low middle income household, right? It was like it was teetering on poverty, right? Um, I think I have a lot of the values I have because I grew up in those circumstances, as opposed to if I would have grown up a rich kid, right? If I would have grown up with many more commodities or just more a more comfortable lifestyle, I would have probably been a different person, right? I think that um, as I was growing up, most of my necessities were covered for, right? Even if we were semi-poor or lower middle class, my parents made sure that we had those basic necessities met. So I'm not going to complain there. But we weren't affluent in the fact that I couldn't have every single thing I wanted, right? So in a sense, I kind of agree. To a certain extent, I kind of agree with you. But when it comes to the homeless individual living in Skid Row, I would say that there is an economic reason why that's bad. So about 4 years ago or 3 years ago, during one of the colder winters that we've had here in LA, there was a fire that got started under the one of the major freeways here, the 10 freeway. I'm pretty sure you remember the 10 freeway near downtown, very close to the fashion and this no close to the warehouse district. It was a pallet fire that got started right under the 10 freeway, and it was huge. It was massive. The whole freeway got closed down. I actually drove through it while the fire was raging, right? The homeless situation is the same sort of. I remember we were talking about dysfunction. Dysfunction costs society way more than you think. Because if that fire would have caused major damage to that 10 freeway, it would have cost California taxpayer money, tens or hundreds of millions of dollars to fix that. So the homelessness comes with an added cost of emergency room visits and services, the added cost of destruction of property, the added cost of petty crime, the added cost of scaring away tourism, right? Because the homeless people take over public transportation, the added cost of just it's just again on an economic level, right? This has nothing to do with morality at this point, right? And obviously I care about the morality side of things, but it's costing us more than you think, right? Because the homeless person that lives on the street, he's gonna live in like very dirty situations. He's gonna hurt himself out. He's gonna, one day he's gonna cut himself, or he's gonna pick up a dirty syringe and use it, and then he's not gonna take care of it until it gets into a serious problem, and then he's gonna go to the emergency room visit, and you can't turn away anyone, right? So right now, our Los Angeles, the medical, the what do you call it, the county medical hospital is absolutely overwhelmed with not just homeless, not just like catering to the homeless, but just poverty, people in poverty in general, right? So that's where I would argue that it is bad. If you want to, as a libertarian or as an economist, if you want to talk about bad, well, it has bad economic implications, right? And again, even tourism, right? Like, trust me, man. Like, I drive these tourists around. It's embarrassing when they're like, "Wow, I didn't think it was this bad," or we're driving through like downtown and they see some very, very grim situations. And I don't know if you know what I'm talking about, but there are very, very grim pictures that I can paint for you, right? Very grim, right? People that are undernourished or malnourished in the streets, walking like zombies, people that are drug addicted. How much of an impact do you think that has on the tourism here?
I can solve those problems, but in different ways. First question is, what do you think about legalized narcotics?
I am for it, actually. I have my opinion on prohibition. I think it hasn't worked. There's a book I could recommend. I'm gonna look for that book. It's called Drug Inc., and it follows the whole story of drug legislation in America. Yeah, I mean, I'm against prohibition.
Okay, now I've redefined my position as a federal libertarian. I don't think they should be illegal on the federal level, but if LA wants to ban them, that's fine. That's on
Okay.
them. But more to the point is, I think if LA legalized narcotics, that bridge wouldn't have been burnt down. Because there's really two big factors that are missing from the narcotics equation to eradicate the problem. The number one that I always like to say is working in poppy fields. Those opium addicts in downtown LA don't have the opportunity to catch a bus an hour outside of the city and go work in a poppy field, right? That's like the key. That's like the key equation missing from legalization.
Right, right. Let them grow their own stuff, so they could do something, I guess. Well, I did mention that pallet fire under the freeway was started in one of the coldest winters that we've had, right? People think that LA is all sunshine and warm weather. No, that's not the case. I mean, sure, if you live in a colder region, 35-degree weather is nothing, right? But now but it's a very bone chilling, dry, the air is dry here. 35 might not seem like a lot, but if you're homeless, it can be a lot, and there's varying degrees of success that even homeless people have, meaning that there are communities, groups of homeless people that get together and they make these I'm pretty sure you guys have seen them. The makeshift tents that they make, and but for sure. Yeah, man, Paul. I'll add you, Paul. You can come anytime, man. Um, so there's you have these groups of homeless people that stick together and they're they helped each other out, but there are also groups of homeless people that are on their own. They are literally, I've seen homeless people. It's pouring rain outside. They are they don't have any shoes. They don't have any sweaters. They're literally just wearing.
Essential services that were there, I mean, they've been stripped from them, right? I mean, uh, a lot of them, the people that I think, as well as the schmug addicts, right? Like the services that were there are just no longer in available to them. So
Are you talking about a somewhere in specific or?
well, I think across the United States, I think but also, I mean, I think there are systems that are in place that make it prohibitively difficult for poor people to get out of that situation, and once you are there, once you're, especially if you have a mental illness, you have an addiction, anything like that, like it is, I mean, the cards are basically stacked against you at that point. So
Oh, yeah. 100%. So Milton, I don't know, man. Like, you know, there's a hidden cost to dysfunction and homelessness, I think.
But uh, my policy solves the problems. And what you mentioned problems with society, and this is, I to me, you're working backwards because the individual is more important than the society. So as long as you maintain the sovereignty of the individual, society will work out for itself. And instead of trying to win the battle in my on my court, I have to win the battle on your court, meaning that you present me with a problem and I'll show you how my policy helps it. More so than your policy.
And so, what do you think about homelessness then?
Okay, so my plan, at least we can provide them with food. Okay, and then if you want to get away from the food thing, we could do a negative income tax. Maybe I'll run the numbers someday, but I have to run the numbers and see how that works or if it's feasible. And so the homelessness problem, I mean, I'm not too opposed to vagrancy laws, meaning that you saw what was going on in Portland, Oregon, right? Where they do that in LA where they take all the tents off the street, right? And they clean the streets.
That's true. Yeah, that is true.
If LA wants to do that, that's LA's problem. Does it get rid of the homelessness? The way you get the negative income tax would get rid of the homelessness because they would be allowed to buy a cheap apartment way off in the country, right? And another layer is that with the negative income tax, the private sector would take care of those people in a way that, let's say, I don't like UBI for note, but well, I'm generally talking about negative income tax, but there's very little difference. So let's just say, the poor person gets $1,000 a month. There would be private entrepreneurs way out in the sticks that said, if you give me that $1,000, here's a little hut, and you'll be given a ration of rice and vegetables, and you and you give me that $1,000, and it costs that guy $800 a month. So the idea behind a UBI is that it would fashion the private market, right? Not necessarily you need an apartment with plumbing and water, right? You can go find your own water, or maybe he delivered. We got bottled water now, right? So to solve the homeless problem, you give each homeless person $1,000 a month. The private sector takes care of the rest. There's a guy out in the sticks, and for $800, he can make a hut and a monthly allotment of food and water, and he takes your $1,000. That's how the UBI is supposed to work, and that's how you solve homelessness.
I think that depends on a couple things. That depends on philanthropy, right? Um, sure, there are some billionaires that might be willing to do this sort of work.
Wait, one
Um,
moment. One moment. It has nothing to do with philanthropy and everything to do with the profit motive. I'm an entrepreneur. I I bought this giant parcel of land. I divided it up into put little huts on all of them. I'm making money. I'm not giving away any money.
oh, I see what you're saying. Okay. So what you're saying is that the negative income tax is a way for the homeless individual to have a monetary value attached to him, because then that that sort of UBI, that version of UBI, gets transferred to this rich individual, and he's gonna find a profitable way to give these homeless people housing in a way that he's gonna find a profitable way, meaning that he's going to cut costs, cut corners, maybe do the bare minimum with that $1,000 a month. Uh, that the homeless person can offer. And with that $1,000 a month, potentially the rich individual will only actually spend $800 of the $1,000 a month, and then have a $200 profit. But you're saying that he will then meet these necessities, these basic necessities for that homeless individual. Am I getting that correct?
Yeah.
Um, you know, in a sense, to a certain extent, there is a lot. We are going to have to depend on some rich individuals to create the infrastructure to meet those needs for homeless people. But I don't like that idea because it implies control. It implies dependency. It implies a sort of it implies being patronizing. That rich individual is like, again, going back to there's this image I said earlier of like the rich guy that all the people underneath him, all the poor people are looking up, and they're just like, hey, are you going to, like with their hand out, like, can I have some more, please? And it's like, no, it just, again, it's just, there. I don't like that relationship. I wouldn't like that relationship between the rich individual and the homeless individual or the poor individual. It's just, it implies more control than what I would like, right? It implies dependency and this patronizing way of achieving a very philanthropic goal, right? But I would rather have what I like about a UBI, and I'm going to repeat this again, is that it's a left-leaning libertarian idea because it implies freedom, first of all. It implies the individual's freedom to do what he wants with that cash, right? And to your point, we both agree on the schmug, legalization or whatever. Um, but I don't know, that system that you just mentioned. I don't like the feel of it. It's patronizing, and it's still it. I don't know. It's
Let me push back on this. And to start off, I don't like your nomenclature used like people like rich and stuff like this. So I was writing down as you're talking, and let's go over it. So not rich. The person who is doing that for the homeless person is not rich. Think about a small time business owner, right? He owns a plumbing company, or maybe a family business that owns a taco restaurant or something like this, right? These people are not like rich. You know what I'm saying? They're business owners. So the person who did that for the homeless person would be on that magnitude of wealth. So they're not rich by any means. Sure, there would be a conglomerate where Big Daddy Warbucks tycoon, tries to, you know, um, make it cut corners and make it sell for $700, right? Sure, but it's not as oppressive as you paint it out to be. And then, secondly, better than the homeless, um, cut corn. Yeah, right. What the problem is, I'm giving the homeless a hut and a monthly ration of rice, vegetables, and water, and you're still complaining. So I'm making the situation better. And for some reason or another, you still have a problem with it. If you want to talk about dignity, that's fine. But those are the two things I had the problem with your answer, is that the guy who does this is not rich. There's no patronizing, and I'm giving the homeless a way out, and you're still not happy.
So okay, okay. I do like where you. I do like that image you're painting. Like in terms of the small business owner, or maybe someone that just owns a lot of a bigger plot of land. So I do like that you're kind of changing the picture. But one thing I would say is that one thing I would ask you is that homeless person beholden to that individual with the property?
Absolutely not, because they can do whatever they want with $1,000. They can stay on Skid Row and buy schmugs with it. Absolutely not.
Oh, I see what you're saying. So they can still receive the $1,000 a month and stay homeless and in Skid Row.
Yes, of course. Sorry, I didn't. I thought that was understood, right? They don't.
Doesn't.
Yeah, they don't. They're not made to go to the hut village or whatever.
I see what you're saying. I think I think both of us do agree on the freedom of choice. I think that's what I'm getting from this, right? The freedom of choice. I think that, and you keep on repeating it, the negative income tax, right?
Yeah.
Right. And that differs from a universal basic income, in that a universal basic income is a cash transfer, right?
So is negative income tax.
Okay.
However, if the difference is, if you get a UBI and you earn $1 million a year, you still get the UBI, right?
Ah, I see what you're saying.
And the negative income tax is you get $1,000 a month, but once you make over 5,000, you get $1,000 a month if you make 5,000 a year. But if you make $5,001, then all of a sudden you're knocked down to $999 a month.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and you kind of have to do it that way, because I ran the numbers, and the UBI is virtually impossible. But yeah, that's how the negative income tax works. You make $5,001 this month. All right, fine. We are only giving you $999.
Ah, I see. Now, my problem with creating an income threshold, and one of the problems that I've seen with current social welfare benefits like EBT or unemployment, is that sometimes people then choose to not work at all, or they choose to.
If you set the threshold so low,
Yeah, well, he did. Well, Milton
Well,
did.
the numbers aren't important. The numbers
oh,
aren't important.
okay,
But if people don't want to work, they can always go live in the hut village or spend
yeah.
a bunch of money on drugs in Skid
I mean,
Row. It's not a
but if the
problem.
threshold is like $5,000 a year, like
No, no, no. I think he said
Well,
five
the
thousand
numbers
dollars.
aren't important.
Okay.
I was
okay,
just trying to.
Now, just for argument's sake, let's say, because I did hear you say, Milton, $5,000 a month,
All
right?
right, all right. Let's codify it.
Right, right,
So, what the first of all, the idea of the UBI is that, I'm sorry, the idea of the negative income tax is that it cannot afford you, let's say, the worst off apartment in the worst off sticks, way out in the country, right? Currently today, let's say it's 700 a month. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
Let's assume there's a grocery store in that town. That grocery store, a month of food and water, let's say it costs you 500. Sound fair?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So that would be $1,200 a month. The important, so we're going to start this program tomorrow. There's a little trick, and the trick is it's going to cost $1,200 to give them all that. The trick is you make the negative income tax $1,199. Okay, so you could make it 1,200 if you wanted to, but
Mm-hmm.
the way Milton Friedman describes it, it's supposed to be lower than subsistence wages. That meaning that if we gave them $1,199 a month, then they would have to go and cut hair for $5. They would have to pick old Granny Smith's weeds every Sunday, for a little pocket change. You know what I mean? This kind of thing.
Right.
But let's say it's $1,200 a month. The way the private property mechanism works is that the entrepreneurs would chase that. They would know that there's millions of homeless people in the dense urban cores, and maybe it would be big apartment blocks that they would build, but they would chase this money. And the bigger they got, the more profits they would make. But the problem is that you're complaining about rich people, where the rich people are the ones getting them off of the streets.
Okay, I kind of want to understand this negative income tax more, so I'm going to ask you a couple of questions, I guess. So you said it definitely is a cash transfer, right?
Yes, straight cash.
But there is a threshold, and in the example that you gave me, where it's 1,200 a month, right?
Yeah.
Where it's 1,200 a month, and you said that it covers the basic rent and the basic food, right, and water, right, the basic necessities. So this individual he will receive this in perpetuity until his income starts reaching a certain level, right?
Yes.
So he's going to continue like doing odd jobs here and there, continue like, cutting hair or something like that. And then earlier I mentioned that you said $5,000 would be the threshold.
Oh, okay. You're right. I did forget to mention that part, the sliding scale. So it's $1,200 a month. So let's see how Friedman describes this. I'm kind of writing this down. So all right. So the apartment and the food cost $1,200 a month, and let's say you actually make $1,200 a month at a factory or something, and therefore that would be the point at which your negative income tax gets cut off. So why would anybody work if they can afford the apartment? And that's the trick about paying below. That's why I was talking about the hut villages, because if you have to work in a factory for 40 hours a week for $1,200 a month, why would anybody do that if they could just get it for free?
Exactly.
That's right. So that's why the negative income tax would start something more at $800, and entrepreneurs would build hut villages with delivered food and water, right? But so let's go off this 800 number. The way it works is that, all right, so you're given a monthly allotment of $800, and you earn, let's see, $800 a month, and you earn, what, if you earn $1, you get 799, or it could start. Milton Friedman's got a good 15-minute video on it, but let's say there is a little buffer, right? So you get $800 a month, and if you earn 900, you still get the full 800, and if you earn 1,000, you still get the full 800, and if you earn 1,100, you still get the full 800. If you earn 1,200, you still get the full 800. But once you earn $1,201, now instead of 800, you only get 799, right? And if you earn $1,202, now you only get 798. So it would, I guess, you would get no money after 2,000 a month.
I see. Okay. Okay. I see what you're saying. That's very interesting. I've always heard about this tax credit system, but I never really fully understood it. Right. Um, I think that there could be. Okay. I think there could be a. I think there could be a, what do you call it? There can be a use for both of these systems, right? And my idea is that if you have the tax credit system, there are certain environments where you can, there's certain like regions or situations where this definitely makes sense, right? Or even situations, right? Uh, but it, but, and this is where you and I kind of differ, is that you and Milton Friedman's system is a way to find constraint to a universal basic income. Meaning, I think that Milton Friedman was the economic world that he was coming from was one that was definitely growing, but it wasn't at the level that our economy is right now. And also Milton Friedman wasn't faced with automation and um, and job loss to the extent and level that we will right now, right? So one of the things I would say is that you know, you seem to be very like or let's say Milton Friedman had a very tight constraint into how much money he would allow to be allotted to addressing poverty and poverty related issues, right? And of course we're talking about 1970s and 80s where the cost of living wasn't what it is now, right? It was a whole different world. I think a universal basic income in the 1980s would have not, it wouldn't have been in the form of $1,000 a month. It would have had to do with the cost of living back then and the inflation levels back then, right? But one of the reasons why, and again, just for the sake of discussion, one of the reasons why I think a universal basic income is necessary, even if an individual is making, let's say, $100,000 a year, right? If there's an individual that's making $100,000 a year, one would say, oh, he doesn't really need that money, right? He doesn't really need it. He has a he has a pretty good income. Let's say he lives very comfortably. Um, um, but going to the universal basic income idea, it's just for discussion's sake, I'm going to continue talking about $1,000 a month. That's $12,000 a year. That's literally 12% of that individual's total income. That is significant enough to boost his income, or let's put it another way. That's significant enough for that individual to be like, hey, this money, you know what? I kind of want it right now. I actually do want $1,000 a month, even though I still make $100,000 a year salary. He's gonna be like, this is still good money for me. Like, this is money that I can make use of, right? And I think that when it comes to how that individual is gonna use that money, let's give a couple different scenarios. Let's say this individual wants to pay off his student loan debt, right? Or let's say this individual wants to buy a new car, or he wants to save up money for retirement, right? Because I remember you were talking about the pension system, right? Let's say a UBI replaces, in a sense, the pension system, so that this individual can then save that $1,000 a month, as because this is a permanent cash transfer, right? And so let's say he keeps on saving that money, and that's like his pension, right? Or, again, all these different scenarios. He wants to buy a car. He wants to pay off his student loan. He wants to use that money to invest in starting a small business for himself. Or, more importantly, and this is where I see this UBI being very important, is that if he, or let's say he uses it to buy more non-essentials, with the value-added tax, well, we're gonna. Value-added tax will mean that we're going to collect some of that money back into the system, right? But let's say that individual is going to instead hire a worker. He's going to hire a nanny. He's going to hire a gardener. He's going to hire a pool cleaner or a dog walker, or he's going to buy art from a local artist, or he's going to go to a show from a local musician. In that way, a universal basic income becomes a stimulus package that helps activate the economy. It helps further increase economic activity, right? He's going to further increase economic activity, because when he hires that nanny or that gardener, or buys art from the artist, he is supporting that other individual. He is putting money back into the local economy. And it's a win-win for everyone. Because let's say that gardener or artist, let's say he's struggling. Let's say the artist, he's not making $100,000 a year. He's making, or maybe that individual is only subsiding on the $1,000 a month, right? If he's only subsiding on $1,000 a month, he's an artist, so as an artist, he's trying to sell his art. He's trying to be a quote unquote productive member of society, right? It's a job, right? when more people have more money in their pockets and they have the freedom to do whatever they want with it, even the individual with $100,000 salary, I think it's a win-win for everyone when that money is put back into these local economies and these local communities, right? Um, it's one of the reasons why I keep on talking about like no income threshold, right? Because um, I think when people think about gaming the system, or when people think about like um, taking advantage of the system, or the Republicans will always talk about like you know whatever corruption. I don't know what the hell they use. Um, I think when you have those thresholds and rules and regulations and requirements, well, yeah, that's when people start being a little bit scheming about how they can receive the utmost, like the highest amount of free money available, right? Going back to the argument that why are you going to work? Why would you work if you're receiving, you know, if you're receiving $12,000 or $1,200 for free without doing anything? Well, people are going to be like, well, yeah, I mean, I'd rather not do anything and receive that money versus working and not receiving anything, right? I do like, I'm not going to completely like, uh, throw away the your system, because I think it can serve a purpose. And the purpose I can see it, it could function as an introduction to a universal basic income, right? But um, whether we like it or not, automation is a real threat, and the I don't think that the negative income tax will be sufficient to cover for once automation takes over a job, right? And hey, Ceviche, how's it going, man? I don't know if you're still here, but I don't want to ignore you either. Yeah, he's not here anymore. So I think even Andrew Yang, what do you call it? Even he always referenced to Milton Friedman's negative income tax, but I think there's a reason why he opted for a universal basic income direct cash transfer. So yeah, I mean I like getting introduced to these ideas that I didn't completely have the full understanding to them, and it definitely has its strengths. I do see its strengths, but yeah, I mean, what are your thoughts? Sorry, I was just rambling.
Okay, so a couple things. Um, the you mentioned that the millionaire would buy a nanny and inject the money into the economy, which is false, because where did they get those taxes from?
Um, okay, so if that, I didn't say millionaire, I said an individual that was making $100,000 a year. Where is he getting the UBI from, you mean? Is that what you're
No,
saying?
meaning, yeah. Where's he getting the UBI from? He's getting it from the economy. So he's not injecting it back into the economy because it was taken from the economy in the first place.
Now, this is where the progressive tax system is very important, whether it be the value-added tax system that I always try to promote, or even the existing income tax system, right? Because the contribution, remember I was talking about the artist, right? The contribution that artist will make according to this new tax system. Remember, I mentioned that you're going to lower the taxes for the bottom tax brackets, right? So that artist, if he is surviving solely on that universal basic income of $1,000 a month, that means that that first $12,000 yearly income is non-taxable, right? So that means that that's literally $12,000 a month for free right there, right? And then going back to the value-added tax system, if that artist is not trying to starve to death, well, he's going to use a lot of that money to buy food essentials like food and water and stuff like that, and help pay his rent. After the initial $12,000 a year, right? And I could even argue, whatever. But after the $12,000 a year, the next tax bracket will then be the first taxable tax bracket, and that will be anywhere between 5 to 10%, right? I would opt for a lower tax, so I would opt for a 5% tax.
Let me stop you right there
Yeah.
and try to show you how progressive tax is a farce. And think of it this way. There's there's a factory owner, and you're arguing don't tax the workers, tax the factory owner, right?
With no, as a matter of fact. Oh wait. Yes. 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 Yeah.
Right. You're saying don't tax the workers because they're poor, tax the factory owner because he's rich, right?
Well. No. Tax the worker, but to a lesser extent than the factory owner. So,
Okay.
so yeah.
Well, to a lesser extent, but I'm saying that we're taxing them zero, right? That's as
No.
less as you can get. No?
Do
All
you
right,
mean the
fine,
fact?
fine. I'll do it your way. So the factory, we're going to tax. There's 100 people at the factory,
Hmm.
and we each tax them $1 a day, right? But the factory owner has to pay $100 a day, right? So you say, let's get a little more progressive, right?
Hmm.
Instead of taxing the worker $1 a day, we'll tax them 50 cents a day. That'll help the
Hmm.
worker out. And we'll shift all that burden onto the factory owner. And instead of taxing them $100 a day, we're now going to tax them 150 or whatever the math works out to be, right? So we've just implemented a progressive tax plan that lowered the tax of the workers and shifted it all to the factory owner, right? So this is your progressive tax plan.
Hmm.
What the factory owner is going to do is just cut the wages of the workers.
Hmm.
That's why a progressive tax is a farce.
I would disagree with you because I do believe in a minimum wage threshold. Right now, the threshold of a federal minimum wage is in the form of $7.25 an hour. Um, when you take into account that minimum wage, it only basically it basically calculates the cost of living in the poorest part of the country, in the least expensive part of the country, meaning that the federal minimum wage means that absolutely no one in the country can go underneath that. So that means that if you live in Montana or Nebraska or any of these other, you are mandated as a employer to at least pay your workers $7.25. I think that we should. I don't think that it should be raised. To it should be. It shouldn't be raised. It should be raised accordingly to inflation, but as minimally as possible. I think that the minimum wage should be increased as minimally as possible. But when a minimum wage threshold goes alongside a universal basic income, that's where you are increasing the wages of your workers, right? You're increasing the wages of the goal is to get more money into workers' pockets, whether it be through unionization and bargaining, or a universal basic income, right? And a universal basic income, if you consider a 40-hour work week, $1,000 a month is like increasing the wages by about another $7.25. So when you combine that minimum wage of $7.25 and the UBI of $1,000 a month, you've essentially increased the wages of all workers across the country to about $14.50, right? Now, and that would be the minimum wage that every individual would get at minimum, right? The beauty about not raising the minimum wage is that you are not putting that pressure, you're not putting that weight on the business owner, on the employer, right? Because it is a subsidy that comes from the government. That that means that the factory owner or the business owner at minimum has to pay $7.25. The government then covers the another $7.25. The factory owner can still, if he chooses to do so, and I'm pretty sure he should do so, can still increment and implement wage increases. I mean, a lot of people raise their employees' wages by 25 cents a year or something like that, or 50 cents a year. I don't know, per hour. But you are lessening the burden on that business owner, especially when it comes to small business owners. And again, when I talk about small business owners, I'm not talking about 500 employees or even 100 employees. I'm talking about less than 50 or 20 employees, or even less than 5, whatever, right? So I think that the struggle is always between the employer and employee. And obviously, there's a long history of unionization and better work environments and rules and regulations on safety and all of these things. But I would argue that at the core of the debacle between unions and employers is the fact that workers just need more money in their pockets. That's it. So going back to the UBI system, that factory owner, the wages that he has to pay his employees is sort of subsidized by a UBI, sort of subsidized, right? It's up to the factory owner and his profit margins. If he can increase the wages of his workers, fine. If he can't, well, at minimum, he's only giving every worker $7.25. The UBI covers half, the next half of that worker's wages, and that means that the factory owner doesn't necessarily have to cut wages, or it doesn't necessarily have to increase the prices of the products and services that they are selling, right? And of course, it's gonna vary. It's gonna vary between if you live in Los Angeles versus if you live in a small town, and what the prices, what the cost of living is, and what the ultimate cost of the final product is, considering all the whatever costs the factory owner has to deal with. But I think a UBI is a much better version of raising the minimum wage, because it achieves the same goal of increasing workers' wages without putting the pressure on the business owner.
Okay, let's get into a little bit of the affordability of this. And you had said that the UBI should comprise of about 60% of the federal budget.
Yeah, but I'm gonna be honest with you. I kind of pulled that figure out of my butt.
That's fine. I just want a number. There's no
Yeah,
wrong answer.
yeah,
And have you, if you play video games, have you ever played the video game Civilization 6 and Civilization 7? Do you know what those are?
yeah. I was an Age of Empires guy, but
Oh, okay, me too.
yeah.
But I love those empire. Civilization is more about, I call them bean counting games, right? Not so much the battle part, but actually like managing an empire.
Right.
And I, I, for my personal taste, I've come to the realization that on a national level, military, military and welfare should be the same amount of money. Meaning that if you're going to spend, if you're going to spend X amount of dollars on military, you should spend the same amount of dollars on welfare. And
Hmm.
because why I say that is it goes back to how the welfare state is inherently tied to the private property mechanism.
Hmm.
Okay, so with that being said, if you gave everyone in America $1,000 a month, that would be $4 trillion. And it's close enough where we could spend another 4 trillion on military. But that means that no other funds are available for anything.
Hmm. Hmm.
So if we did the 4 trillion UBI and the 4 trillion military,
Hmm.
that's it for federal expenditure. Would you be okay with that?
Um, kind of, sort of, yes, sort of. But I would push back on the military expenditure because I have a different perspective on military. I have a different perspective on the military industrial complex, right? Um, okay,
I don't like it too much either,
right.
but
So, okay, when it comes to like hiring so many soldiers, it goes back to this idea that the government is paying these soldiers wages, really, pretty well off wages to do the bidding of the government, right? Do the bidding of defending the nation, right?
sure.
Um, so much so far as to some people go to the military as a means of having a financial future, a more safe financial future, right?
Yep.
Um, I would argue that technology should be able to change the rules of war. If not, it's already been changing in the last 10 years or 15 years. If you look at the how the war is being fought in current wars are being fought right now, there's a lot of missiles being thrown around, right? There's a
Yep.
lot of drones. There's a lot
Yep.
of missiles. There are foot soldiers, but any rational commander or general or chief or whatever will try to limit the exposure of foot soldiers because unaliving is not something that's good for your military, right? Unfortunately, like Ukraine is forced to battle it out the way it has to battle it out. There's still a lot of drone usage there, right? There's plenty of drone usage. If anything, the videos I've seen so far, when it comes to foot soldiers, is that they just fire wildly. They literally just fire wildly. They're just like they don't even know what they're shooting at. They're just like just kind of spraying it because I don't know, it's weird, right? But when it comes to the drone usage, there's much more precision and it's much more effective, right? So I feel like the rules of war will change, and it should change, because why are we exposing human lives in these processes? I could even argue that there will be a time where you can attach a weapon to a bipedal or a four-legged robot, and you now have a walking sentry, right? Especially with AI and how it can, you can have a camera and attach it, and I'm pretty sure that AI will be far more deadly and accurate than a human being, right? And I'm very cautious of talking about this because I am anti-war in general, right?
Yeah, me too.
And that goes on to my second point. I was having this conversation with this individual about NATO, because obviously a Republican talking point is the fact that the US government has invested more money in NATO, and the European countries don't contribute as much as we do, and it's the reason why Trump is either trying to back away from NATO or have these European countries contribute more, right? But that begs a question. First of all, NATO was created in the Cold War as a deterrent to the Soviets and communism, right? And in this Cold War, there was all sorts of proxy wars that were fought, right? There was never a direct battle between the US and the Soviet Union. But I feel like, first of all of those wars is actually one of the reasons why the Soviet Union fell apart, right? Because they broke their bank, right? Not only did they break their bank, but like when it comes to the US's role in geopolitics, the US has created a lot of animosity amongst other nations, right? We already have an image as the war hawks. Ever since, even I would even go so far as the Korean War, right? But even the Korean War, the Vietnam War, the interventions in Latin America, the Middle Eastern conflicts, all of these things have cemented the U.S. to be war hawks who only sell destruction, right? So I think the US's role in geopolitics has been detrimental to us. First of all, because the military industrial complex means that we have to spend so much of our government budget on the military. That already is a huge amount of money. It's so much money, right? And on the other hand, when it comes to the argument that Republicans try to be like, oh well, NATO, NATO doesn't pay more Europe doesn't pay into NATO as much as we do. But I don't see European countries poke bears like we have, right? I don't see European countries intervene in or poking the bear in the Middle East. I don't see them poking the bear with Russia. I don't see them poking the bear with China. I don't see them poking the bear with any other nation. Like, strictly speaking, Europe is trying to cement their relationships on an economic front. And that means that they have very little enemies, except for Russia, right? And that's a whole other argument. The whole argument that NATO, Russia not being let into NATO has, cemented them as the permanent enemy of NATO, right? Whatever. That's a whole other issue. But again, Europe isn't going around poking bears and starting conflicts. It's the US pokes bears and starts conflicts, right? So in my eyes, when you are creating this geopolitical environment of handling these international conflicts with war and with armaments and with, you know, and many US manufacturers of weapons are raking in billions and billions of dollars, right? What does that tell you about the US system, right? What does that tell you about us as a nation, right? You don't see China or North Korea or again, Russia's a whole different subject. Or you don't see North Korea or China being antagonizing Europe in a military fashion, right? Or you don't see the Middle East having these deep, or Iran having this deep hatred for Norway, or for uh, Germany, or for Sweden. No, it's the U.S. that pokes the bear, right? And so NATO isn't starting wars. They are just fulfilling their role as a support for the U.S. military, and they benefit from it because they're not out there. That, you know, it makes sense that they're not paying more into NATO, right? It just makes sense, right? Why would they pay? Why? It's almost like if you go to a bar and you're with a group of friends, and then there's that one friend. There's that one friend that whenever he gets drunk, he wants to start a fight, and now he's dragging everyone else into the fight. And it's like, dude, what the hell? Like, we're trying to be peaceful here. We're trying to have a good night. You know, we're trying to pick up chicks or whatever, right? And here is one of the members of the friend group that is starting fights. And because he's a friend and because we have a mutual agreement to protect each other, well, here we all go getting involved into fights that we never started. And that's the European countries, right? That's the rest of NATO, right? So I don't think military. I don't think military is the answer for international disputes. I think that Europe. I mean, sorry. I think that the U.S. and Russia are very much responsible for the manufacturing of weapons and then selling it to all of these conflicts in Africa, in the Middle East, in Latin America, further adding to just overall, like, misery and unalivings, you know. So I would argue that sure, we do need a military. I agree with that. We do need a military. I think, again, technology can give us the opportunity to lower our cost in the military, when you're not hiring as many soldiers, first of all, when you don't have to upkeep all of these F-35s and, you know, all these things, you know. I think a lot of the equipment could be used for quote unquote peaceful activities. I don't know what you can do with a U.S. destroyer or an airplane carrier, right? But at the end of the day, the U.S. is a war hawk, right? And even if Trump was talking about no new wars, well, guess what? Every president gets to wield a stick, and Trump, being the egomaniac that he is, well, he's gonna swing that stick wildly, right? He's gonna be like, look at my new stick, and you know, look at this, and you know, don't test me because I will smack you with this stick, right? So again, even with military, I would say a good, what did I say originally? 60%, right? I would say a 40-20, right? 40% UBI, 20% military. That would be my choice, right? And then 30%, Sorry, 40% for anything else, right? But I just I've been a huge critic of military interventionist since I was a teenager. Like I am just full critic, right? I don't know. Do you remember the movie Lord of War with Nicolas Cage?
No.
It's obviously fiction, but you should watch that movie, right? It gets into the sales of arms and military equipment, and how it's created a black market across the world. You know.
Let me try to make you see things through a different lens. And it's not that I'm kind of with you. I'm kind of on the same page as you. But let's look at the British Raj, right? When the British took over India. You know what I'm talking about?
Yes. What year was
Okay.
that? What year was that, man? If you know.
Uh, it was right. I think it was during the Civil War, or once they lost the colonies, Britain started going into India.
Okay, mid 1800s.
Yeah, to early to um, let's just say it started in 1825, and they conquered the whole India in like 1899.
Right.
Okay, so I'm trying to make you see things through a different lens, and what they did is they went through the continent. All right, so before they got there, there was plenty of warring factions. Muslims versus Hindus and Joe versus Ralph, like competing. There was already violence that existed there beforehand. Chiefdoms, kingdoms, and stuff like this. And what the British did is they entered India and they picked a side, right? So the point is that even though they were warmongering, half of the people loved them.
Mm.
Now, in the end, on the overall scheme of things, it probably wasn't best for the British nor the Indians. But I like to say this. You know, when Cortez showed up in Mexico City,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of people in the countryside hated the Aztecs, right?
Yeah.
So when Cortez showed up, they thought he was a hero. So
Right.
so to look at war so one-dimensionally,
Mm-hmm.
it kind of gives you a victory without considering all factors. Now, war is bad. It's not good. I'm not trying to champion war. I'm just trying to make you see things through a different lens. But when you're talking specifically about the United States, when they're selling illegal arms to people, remember, 50% of those people are happy. And at the same time, the United States is shoring up alliances. We're getting on their good side. So this is diplomacy. And I'll admit, there's ambitious generals out there, right? It's just the military is just like Amazon. They just want to grow. They just want to make their tidy profit, go home to their wife and kids. Same thing with the military and ambitious generals, right? Maybe they're starting conflicts to
Mm.
sell more missiles. It could be. It could be. But I I was tied. You're right. Our we are war hawks, but I was tying the military to the welfare state, and I think it would be a better example is if we used it. Let's say you know the country of Singapore, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so this is a city state, and it's fun to think of government as Los Angeles or Singapore, not the United States. So Singapore has a military and a police force, and that's why I like to lump those together, is because the military protects from the outside and the police protect from the inside.
Mm-hmm.
Does the military necessarily have to invade India? No, but it can kind of get out of hand. So that's why I say military slash police defending expenditure should be equal to the welfare state, because as you know, I believe that the private property protection and the welfare state are intimately linked. If you want to say 40% to welfare and 20% to military, like, I can dig it, right? Like 2 to 1. It might keep the war hawks down.
Mm-hmm.
But the problem still remains is that $4 trillion. So I got my pen and paper right here. If it's 4 trillion to welfare or UBI or negative income tax, if it's 4 trillion to welfare and it's 2 trillion to military, that's
Mm-hmm.
perfect. That's the entire federal budget.
Mm.
So would you be okay with that? No,
Um,
yeah, would you be okay with that?
yeah, I mean, I wouldn't cement it to like, again, always room for compromise and wiggle room. But no, I do like those figures off of face value.
Okay, and now we can go into what Milton Friedman's really core is, and that is like no regulation on industry, right? And we can kind of get into the tax system. So there are no minimum wages, and I'll argue that minimum wages are to collect taxes. Are you familiar with the Code of Hammurabi?
Is it the one that? No, not too.
Okay, it's one of the oldest law books on Earth. It was in 1700 BC. It was a giant stone, and it carved out all the laws of the Mesopotamian Empire. And funny enough, there are minimum wage laws in there. And one of them, there's only a couple, maybe only about 5 or 10 for builders, but one of them is for ferrying people across the Euphrates River. And there's a minimum wage. Now, why did they have a minimum wage? The lefty would say to protect the worker, but that's very obviously not the case. The reason why they had a minimum wage was so that they could collect a sufficient amount of tax. In other words, they had a charter on the ferries going across, because the problem was that without a minimum wage for ferries, any Tom, Dick, or Harry could weave together a boat and start ferrying people across for a penny less than the guy 100 yards down the river,
Mm-hmm.
right? So it's very evident that minimum wage laws in that time, in that specific instance, was not to protect the worker, not to change society, not to do anything but collect a proper amount of tax off of each ferry.
Mm. Okay, that's interesting. I can see where you're going with that. uh, okay. Where I would go with that is that um, in modern day, I feel like the role of the government. So this is my perspective on the role of the government. Um, in medieval times, in which you have nation states and kingdoms fighting other kingdoms and stuff like that, there was a tax and a sort of what do you call it when you have to get people into the military? Conscription.
Okay, yeah, yeah.
So there's a tax and a conscription to the kingdom to fight wars against other kingdoms or other nation states, right? So that means that when it comes to how the let's say the castle, right? The castle versus the farm, the surrounding farmlands, right? Well, the surrounding farmlands had to be taxed to support the soldiers and the royals and the administrators of the kingdom, right?
Yep.
And the story, the history of Europe and medieval times is just a lot of war, just a lot of war. It was war everywhere, left and right, and it's not unique to Europe. But let's just go with the example of medieval Europe, right? Um, I That was medieval times, right? You could still apply that same logic to the nation building uh, after the Enlightenment, right? With with France and Bonaparte and the U.S. and England, and you still kind of carry this on to today, to modern day, right? To modern day. I don't think in a world with automation we should continue that model, right? We still have remnants of it because again, we're not producing any of our foods in the cities, right? Or yeah, we're not producing the raw materials for the food itself in the cities, right? We're not growing soy, we're not growing wheat in the cities, we're not growing the vegetables or the fruits. We are just consuming the processed foods that come from it, right? We're either consuming the processed foods or they're shipping foods to the cities, right? We're buying foods from rural areas, right? Now, in medieval times, you had a large workforce in agriculture. You had to have a large workforce in agriculture, right? Um, uh, what technology did you have in agriculture back then? You had the plow, you had the farm animals, all of these things, but you still needed hands. You still needed labor. You still needed a lot of labor, right? I think the animals, the bulls that carried the plow was a technological advancement that saved up a lot of time, but you still need a lot of labor, right? Now, if you go to today and you see the self-driving tractors, right? Um, it's doing a lot of the work. Like at this point, if it's a self-driving tractor, you don't even need the driver, right? It's just you just program it and let it do its thing, and I don't see a reason why there could be errors to it, right? It should be a closed system that that is going to go over and over again on the same plot of land, right? And then of course when it comes to harvesting, you still need some hands right now. You still need hands, but I am seeing more and more technology come into that harvesting process, where you have as a business owner, as a landowner, you're always going to find ways to make your workload more efficient and faster, right? So for example, I've seen videos of like you have like these huge tractors pulling a wagon where you're gonna store the watermelons, and you have like five guys, five five illegal immigrants, right? Uh, working their ass off to get those watermelons into the wagon or something like that, right? I truly think that automation can start taking over those jobs as well, right? Whether it be through whether it be not through AI, but through more belts, more belts and more robot arms, for example, where you are further reducing the labor needed to produce the food that we're eating, right? So in that sense, the economy has shifted not from the castle depending on the farmer's work and labor and taxes. More so, the economies that we enjoy right now, the winners of the industries that are winners of the economy, that are producing a lot of the profits, excess profits, they exist in the cities, right? That means that there's tech in Silicon Valley, there's finance in New York, there is, well, not so much anymore, but there was Hollywood and the film industry in Los Angeles. And then across all cities across the nation, you'll find a mixture of many different industries, right? There's all sorts of industries, right? Amazon warehouses and McDonald's and whatever, right? And these are the winners of the economy because the economy is largely like driven by these sectors, right? Not so much the agricultural industries that are creating very essential things that we need to survive, more so the non-essential economies that produce, $50,000 vehicles, video games, right? Now, video games are now digital. Entertainment was a huge industry for the United States. It was a huge industry. Think about it. Think about the power that Hollywood had on the rest of the world. When Hollywood is exporting movies to Europe, to Asia, to, that was a huge fact. That was a huge sector of the American economy, right? So to me, I think that times have changed, industries have changed, the winners of the economy are changing, right? It's going from the winners of the economy of the 20th century was McDonald's and Coca-Cola and Walmart and Target, and grocery chains, right? Oil was a big winner of the 20th century, right? Oil is a huge one because we're producing plastics from oil, right? Now, I would want to see the economy shift into digital, right? And we're already kind of seeing it, right? When it comes to video games, you don't need a physical copy of that video game. When it comes to our phones, well, yeah, sure, you bought the phone itself, but now you're consuming things through your phone, right? You're consuming media through your phone. You're watching movies on your phone. You're playing games. You're playing video games on your phone, even, right? And when you have digital products, you're not leaving physical. You're not leaving a physical trail behind, right? You're not overproducing plastics to create the discs for a video game, right? Or whatever, right? I think that if the economy is changing, so should the rules, right? And I won't hesitate. I'm not one to hesitate when it comes to taxing the wealthy, because this Reaganomics, trickle down economics, goes out the window the moment you automate, right? So I would agree with you when it comes to the government's role in regulating transactions or regulating free market, it should be it should be at a minimum. I don't disagree with you on that. It should be at a minimum, right? But when it comes to a federal minimum wage, when it comes to a UBI, when it comes to rearranging your tax structure on a progressive model to help the little guy, to help the individual who is only making under $60,000 a year, right? Or $50,000 a year, or under $40,000 a year, I won't hesitate to create policies that help that individual. Now, if that individual, he 1 year he's going to be making $40,000 a year, but the next year he was very, he worked hard, he worked smart, he opened a business, and he started making more money. We can argue how this progressive tax system works. I could even go so far as to, widen the tax brackets and also reduce the taxes for someone making $100,000 a year, right? This is all wiggle room that I can offer to tax the medium household, the middle class income, right? People are saying that people are saying that the lower class income threshold is under $55,000 a year now, right? It used to be $20,000 a year, but now it's $50,000 a year. So where does that push the middle class income threshold? Does it push it past $150,000 a year or $200,000 a year, right? That's to be discussed, right? But I won't hesitate to try to tax the millionaire. And the only argument then is, how do you make a fair system and an efficient system in which millionaires aren't avoiding their taxes, right?
Let me give you a couple. Let me give you a couple policies that would help out the little guy, if you don't mind.
Sure, yeah, of course.
So first off, what do you think about the 40-hour work week? There's a federal law that says after 40 hours you get paid time and a half. Would you be in favor or against this law?
I don't like laws that try to enforce behavior. Like, I guess that law applies to the employer, right? Meaning that if that law wasn't in place, the employer would then ask more of the employee. But I'm in the camp that Americans are overworking themselves, right? So I am in the camp that putting more hours into your work doesn't necessarily mean that you are being more productive, right? I am in the camp, and I've seen this firsthand when you work at I used to work at a UPS warehouse. I used to work at a UPS warehouse during the pandemic, right? And during the pandemic, we were pulling a 6-day work week quite consistently for, I think it was like 4 or 5 months of consistently pulling 6-day work weeks. I worked as much as 75 hours one week, right? Or it was more than that, actually. It was like 78 hours in one week, right? And even I was a supervisor, so my workload wasn't as heavy as the actual workers themselves. And I had some of my guys from the ones that I was supervising, They were putting in 12-hour days. Monday through Friday was 12 hours each day, and then an extra 8 hours on a Saturday. He, what does that come down to? That's like 12 times 5 is 60. Yeah, 68 hours, right? Or no? Am I right? No.
Well,
Yes.
the way I was going with it is, let's talk about your dad a little bit, right? Because you said he was working three jobs, and later in life he had two, you know?
Yeah.
And the point I'm trying to make is that the market for labor dictated that he had to work three jobs to provide for his family. Now, what do you think taxing the millionaire is going to reduce his hours? Who's to say that a guy supporting his family shouldn't be working 80 hours a week? It's the same with the homeless. They shouldn't be living on Skid Row. I'm not conceding to that fact so fast, right? I would want to reduce his hours, but how is taxing the millionaire going to reduce your father's hours?
Um. So so one of the reasons why I said that I am not fully for regulating behavior through policies. Let's say you make it illegal to work more than 40 hours, right? Which is an extreme example, right? Um, the reason why I put that example is because I'm not against people that want to work to their heart's content, right? Like, I'm not against that necessarily, right? I think every individual has different capacities. Even the guy, the workers that I mentioned at the UPS warehouse, these guys were like, they were between 18 and 25 years old, and they were football players. So they had the condition to like exert, to actually do these hours, right? Because like being a football player, you go through these really really hardcore, um, you know, um, drill exercises, and you work on your conditioning and all these things, right? So kudos to them for being able to sustain that amount of hours for a prolonged time. But one of the things that I wanted to mention as an why I bring that up is because there comes a time where if you are consistently working those hours, there will be a time where you're going to come to work tired. You're going to come to work tired, and you're not going to be productive when you're tired. No. If you're not allowing your body to rest like it should, it actually is a detriment to me as a supervisor, right? Let's say that that high school graduate, that hard worker. Let's say he was working 4 weeks in a row, just 60-hour work weeks, right? And depending on the individual's conditioning, some people might be able to do it consistently for just 1 week, or other people might be able to do consistently for 5 weeks, right? But there will come a time where that individual's body is tired because you're not resting properly, because you're not, hopefully you're eating right, hopefully you are resting properly. But even then, like, if you're not doing the necessary things to heal your body, like let your body rest and regenerate itself, then you're doing yourself a disservice. And again, I'm talking about a blue collar job that is very very uh, physically demanding. I mean, you could also apply this to mentally demanding jobs, right? What As a supervisor or owner of a company, why would I want you to overexert yourself and give me one? Okay, let's say you're gonna give me one quality week of hard work, but then the next week you're gonna be so tired and fatigued that you're gonna half-ass your work, and I'll be like, what's the point of you working that much if you're going to half-ass your work? the next week, right? That's the problem I see with America right now. It's the hustle mentality, it's the hustle culture. Again, I'm not trying to knock down anyone that hustles. Hustling isn't just about working hard, it's about working smart. So, I'm not trying to like, I'm not trying to knock them down at all. But when I mentioned my father's example, I also linked it to the health repercussions that come from not having a proper work-life balance. And it's one of the reasons why I brought it up in the healthcare discussion, right? Because if you have a population that doesn't have the time out of their day to eat healthy, to take care of themselves, to do daily exercise routines, to cook food at home, to work on their mental health, to spend time with their families, all you're doing is you're creating a population that slowly kills themselves. Slowly, like, how can I blame someone that is overworking themselves and then they come out with like liver disease or kidney disease or diabetes or obesity or heart disease? How can I blame that individual if he's either he's forced to work that many hours out of necessity, or he is like, or he's just a workaholic and he just wants whatever, right? But then once that individual gets sick, there's another perspective. Do we as a society have the responsibility in the healthcare industry to treat that individual's disease? Are we responsible for the lack of that individual's responsibility to maintaining his own health, right? It's one of the reasons why I think that the healthcare system is broken in a sense, because we're spending so much money on sick care, on people developing these diseases, but we're doing nothing to give people the resources for preventative care and avoiding falling into these diseases, these chronic diseases, right? And obviously chronic implies that it doesn't happen from one day to the next. It implies that it is years and years of, let's put it this way, mismanaging your body, right? You're mismanaging your body, you're mismanaging your rest, your diet, the exercise routines that you should do. You should go to daily walks, you should be active, you should have an exercise routine, right? Because what are Americans known for? They're known for obesity, they're known for heart disease, they're known for high blood pressure, they're known for cancer. All of these things are killing Americans right now, right? I just want to avoid that in the first place. I just want to invest in preventative care.
Yeah. Do you have your computer in front of you right now?
I do, but I have to tether it with a hotspot. So I don't know if it will work with me being on live.
Oh, it's not that important, because what I wanted to say is that you say that the old castle and the farm system is out the door. And I would disagree, because if you look at the river Ganges, you will see that it is all farms. And there are big cities and there are little cities all over the place. And I just looked down in there and I saw a little Coca-Cola stand. There's little corner stores and stuff, and these people are eating directly from the ground.
Mm,
And you know, you could think that they're living a more natural way of life. And
mm,
sure, if you want to contrast the United States with the Ganges River, I'll give it to you that maybe there's some force underneath that is extracting too much wealth from the working class. But I would say that the same type of system works in the river's Ganges, in the castle and farm system, where there are aristocrats and there are rich people, and the farmers always do complain that they're not getting enough silver for their fall harvest and things like this. But, and maybe that problem is a little more exacerbated in the United States. I wouldn't say so much. And I'll let the cat out of the bag. And I always like to go back to slavery. And
Mm-hmm.
it's a bad system, but slavery existed for 5,000 years. And in the South, when slavery was running rampant, it's not like they were getting whipped from sunup to sundown.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely, there were some atrocities. And there's been many slave revolts throughout history. But it's not too far-fetched to imagine a righteous slave owner. As funny as that sounds,
Mm-hmm.
a southern aristocrat, he's got 20 to 50 slaves, he's a farmer, he loves his slaves. Yeah, don't touch my daughter, right? Maybe something like that. But there was an understanding. He takes care of his slaves. That's his property. He's not trying to, so then we pull it back to the United States, and I'll give it to you. Maybe the American worker is a little oppressed, but not by much. I would say if you got things your way, our life would only improve by 2%. And that's why I go to the responsibility of government. So far as we give all the people on Skid Row $800 a month, there's really no need to try to fix society. That's the difference between the left and the right. I'm trying to maintain the sovereignty of the individual, and you're trying to maintain the sovereignty of the society. Where my theory says that if you maintain the sovereignty of the individual, society will work itself out. Sure, some will fall through the cracks and it's not perfect, but if you try, I I say you're trying to work backwards, and I don't want to mean that in a negative light, but if you're trying to work backwards, and there's nothing wrong with doing that, you keep harping on the technology, right?
Yeah.
And how it's different from the castle and farm system. And I explained to you in the Ganges. And what the way my system works is that we set some ground rules, and come hell or high water, the system's going to work. So you keep trying to throw wrenches into the gearworks, but it's not dismantling my system. We work on principles, and I can show you how it will help society. Whereas you are naming all these problems in society and not necessarily, I don't know, you're not connecting the benefit system to the tax system.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
Meaning, like, all these people are having heart attacks and all this stuff, and so what do you want to do? You want to pass regulations on
Mm.
farms for not using GMOs, blah, blah, blah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's lots of problems with society, but I would attribute that to the city. If you look back in ancient Mesopotamia, in Babylon, biggest
Mm.
city on earth for 1,000 years, um, there was definitely problems with inside that city. Murder, right? All the lot, right? And I don't see that the problems in downtown LA are in any way attributed to the system of government that we had, because they existed 5,000 years ago. It's that kind of behavior is inherent or innate to the city itself, not from the wider spectrum of um of political policies. Yeah.
I I do get where you're going with this. I do understand it, and I guess yeah. To defend myself, right? I've always been a person that works backwards from the problem itself. So you're right. I always start with the problem. I'm always one to identify the problem, because I think that's a major problem. That's an issue I see with modern governance or modern political discourse, is that if you don't understand the problem itself, and you don't really like understand like the underlying causes of those issues, then you're going to implement band-aids, or you are going to implement ineffective solutions to those problems, right? So going to your the Mesopotamia, so I guess what you're saying is that it's whether it's an ancient Mesopotamia or modern LA, there always has existed inner city issues, right? Inner city
Yep.
issues. I can agree with you on that. I can agree with you to an extent, right? Because I grew up here, right? I grew up in LA. 32 years, 30 years of living here. I saw how this city has changed and evolved, right? It's changed in so many ways, right? You were here, you mentioned the other day that you were here in the early 2000s. And you do remember that back in the 90s, 80s, 90s, and 2000s, there was like a gang epidemic, right? Gang violence epidemic, right?
Yep.
And one thing I would say is that this city has evolved a bit away from that in the last 8 years or 10 years, somewhere along those lines. Since around 2015 to 2016, that there's been a culture shift here in LA, because the sort of there's a couple of reasons, and I'm gonna be honest. I'm gonna be brutally honest. Part of the reason is because of gentrification, right? A lot of the historically violent neighborhoods were gentrified, and the new population that came in, they were very liberal, very easygoing. Usually white middle class kids that came from, they had very liberal, very liberal, life mentalities or whatever, and they're, it's a difference if it would have been a gun totting, a pew pew totting, uh, southern guy, right, moving to LA, right? Part of that is because of gentrification, but also another part is because the population itself grew tired of the violence. They just grew tired of it, right? And I mentioned I'm like in the east of downtown. Notoriously, it was largely Hispanic, and many gangs there was a lot of gang activity in the area I live in right now. Even just like 8 years ago, 10 years ago, right? But now that I'm here, it's very nice. It's like super quiet. very calm. The people that live here now, a lot of them have been living here for 10 to 12, 15, 20, 25, 30 years, right? It hasn't been gentrified here as much as other areas, so it's a lot slower. So I wouldn't attribute the fact that it's better solely on gentrification, but it's night and day from what it used to be in the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s, right? They filmed the movie American Me in this neighborhood, and it was based off of true, it was based off of true, true events or whatever. So there's a couple of things. The dysfunction I think we talked about this yesterday. The dysfunction, I attribute the dysfunction that you see in the inner cities from what conservatives like to call the decay of the nuclear family, right? One of the things that I can agree with someone like Charlie Kirk, I agree with his conclusion, but I don't agree to the arguments that leads into those conclusions, is that the degradation of the family and the lack of, for example, two parents in a household, single mother household, I think that would be the only thing I agree with him, because he doesn't go further enough to explore that issue at all, right? He doesn't explore the fact that when it comes to early child development, it's not just about the parents staying together. It's about understanding how child development works, how many, like, the stages to child development, the how essential it is for the parents to be active participants in that child's life, and how historically in the inner cities, the factories were always trying to take away that parent from their children, right? Because one thing that I absolutely, I'm always going to critique this Charlie Kirk talking point, or people on that camp. They're gonna be like, oh, feminism is the reason why the nuclear family is dissolving, because women want to, instead of starting families at 20 years old, no, they want to spend time in their careers, and all this, you get what I'm saying, right?
Mm.
But I lived a different reality, because my mom, the moment she got here is the moment she had to go to work, right? Charlie Kirk is referring to modern feminism, right? Modern feminism meaning a career woman that is making probably even three figures, because they're college educated and they have a pretty important role in whatever, they have a pretty well paid job after graduating from college, and most likely, yeah, they will not start a family in their 20s, or some women don't even start families at all, ever. They pass that window, right? That's the reality of wealth and people that are better off, right? But the reality for me was the fact that my mom, she had to work out of necessity. And if I see people in my community, it's the same thing, right? I see so many mothers that are trying to be active participants in their children's life, but how can you be an active participant if you have a full 40-hour work week? And not just it's not the fact that you have a 40-hour work week, but like both of you and your husband have to have a 40-hour work week, right? And and this is what I saw happening in the 90s and 2000s, You had the hardest working migrants come in to live in the city. They were, again, food, like, again, hard workers, right? Again, my mom, she would go to work and she would still come home to cook food from us. It didn't matter how exhausted she was. She made sure that we were well fed, right? So I come from that line of strong women, right? But I don't think that's a reality you want for the healthy development of your child, right? If you're going to bring a child into this world, do what the Asians have been doing to create success amongst their children, right? I mean, I'm pretty sure you're aware that both East Asians and South Asians, meaning Chinese, Japanese, Koreans, and Indians, have the highest success rate and highest college graduates amongst their children, right? Who's to say we should be studying? We should be studying what they're doing right. What is it that they're doing right? What is it that leads a child to grow up in a healthy manner? Like, what's the secret to their success, right? When I see an Asian individual, I wouldn't say this is 100%, accurate every single time, but I always see someone that is very mentally stable, emotionally stable, financially stable, even physically stable, because nowadays, because of the fitness trend, I see everyone's jumping on board on this fitness trend, and they're very successful in different avenues, right? So when it goes, again, going back to the dysfunction of the inner cities, that's what I came out with in my experience, right? I have the privilege of having grown up in this system and not succumbing to it. Because many of my friends, you could say, have succumbed to it, or many of my friends that I grew up with lack the self-reflection and the I don't want to sound like I'm trying to say like I'm smarter than them or anything like that, but they did not, how do I put this, like the mental capacity to dig deep into these issues and strive to understand these problems, right? So that's the reason why it always sounds like I'm trying to socially engineer, because to get to the social engineering, you have to dissect the social circumstances that you see. Once you dissect these social circumstances, I mean, the only reason you want to dissect is because you see something wrong with it, right? The only reason why you want to dissect these social issues is because you see something wrong with it and you find the need to fix it, right? And that is my background. That is what fuels my passion. It is not even the fact that I want economic justice per se. It's more the fact that I want to solve the dysfunction that I grew up seeing, and I want to address the dysfunction. So in order to address the dysfunction, I have to socially deconstruct and dissect the dysfunction to really, really, truly understand the dysfunction and understand the underlying causes of the dysfunction, and then, only then, start to engineer solutions, right? So, Like I said, I'm a nobody. Dude, I've been poor my whole life. I've been legit. I have not. Um, I am not successful in any, at all. I've never been successful in my life. I've always struggled, and I've always held minimum wage jobs, and struggle with mental health issues and depression and anxiety. Um, um, I would have hoped that having the brain that I have, I would have hoped that at least I would have been a bit more financially successful. But on the contrary, I am very financially constrained, and I've been constrained for many reasons. I'm gonna take the responsibility that, yeah, I do have fault when it comes to my situation. Um, but one thing is for sure, my brain is always active. It's always thinking. It's always connecting dots. It's always constantly working, constantly working. Because the passion that fuels me is having the pain of growing up in these situations and these environments. You know, I, you know, I, I'm not shy about sharing about my life, uh, because it is a lesson that needs to be learned. In a sense, maybe that's not the right way to word it, but it is something worth dissecting to understand my, why I think the way I do and all that. Because I grew up with a lot of dysfunction. I grew up in my family. Early on in my family, there was a lot of instability, right? There was a lot of relationship instability, emotional instability, a little bit of financial instability. I say a little bit because, hey, we were like lower middle class or whatever. But the biggest thing that really, really messed me up was the emotional and the relationship instability, right? So, and on top of that, growing up in my community, looking around me, my friends, a lot of, again, same thing, same sort of social issues, right? Single, parents fighting, divorces, separation, single mothers, domestic abuse and violence. I mean, I am not shy to talk about these things because it's all in the effort to learn and grow and do better, right? So I'm not shy to touch any subject, right? Domestic violence, all of these things. I mean, yeah, gang violence on the streets, right? Crime and drug use and all these things, like I had a friend that passed away when he was 19, I believe, from drug overdose, right? And and I and I'm so lucky because I could have easily gone down the same path he did, right? I do have addictive traits, and the lucky thing about me is that I am a homebody, and I isolate myself a lot. I love, maybe love is a strong word, but I tend to isolate myself and not go out, and just for days on end, just not do anything and not go out. And I truly think that saved my life, because if I would have been there and followed every step that my friend took, I would have become addicted to certain substances, and it would have led to me not being here today. You know. So yeah, I just try to learn from the dysfunction. That's it.
But that's why I'm saying that you should try to solve the economic problem, because the problems you're describing are existing in a system that didn't exist. So if you did have the negative income tax, because I like to think at the core issue, money was part of the problem, meaning that your parents had to work so much that it caused stress on them, and then they alleviated it through what you described. Whereas if they did have a little bit extra money, then it would naturally fix itself.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, I yeah, no, that's pretty accurate actually. That's because a lot of issues that happen amongst parental relationship will always come from the constraints that come from financial duress, right?
Of course.
So give me 1 second. I need to solve a puzzle. So um, at the end of the day, like that's one of the reasons why I have to find a sweet spot where if I talk to a conservative, I am not over asking, right? I'm not saying, oh, we need this high amount of money of UBI, but I'm also not under asking. And and to your point, I feel like they, they should have implemented a negative, sorry, a
Negative income tax.
negative income tax 40 years ago, 50 years ago, right? And I feel like even that little bit of help would have meant a lot to a lot of people, right? Um, but now, one phrase that comes to mind is too little, too late, right? I'm not I'm not a nihilist or a pessimist. I'm not a pessimist. Sorry, I'm not a pessimist by saying that. I'm just trying to be a realist and say, hey, we missed many opportunities over history, right? Again, I don't know if you remember me talking about Martin Luther King fighting for a minimum wage guarantee back before he was assassinated. Um, uh, During Nixon's presidency, a similar bill to, I forget if it came in the form of a tax credit or a UBI. I think it was a tax credit. Was it was put to the vote in the Senate twice, and it failed both times. Apparently, because the Democrats thought that it wasn't enough and they wanted more, so they just vetoed it. And I'm not too sure about the specifics, but you know, it would have been amazing to have that back then, right? But that's where my critique comes of the U.S. government. That's why I have historically been on the left side of things, because that's always been my critique, always since I was a teenager. I don't know if you've read the book A People's History of the United States by Howard Zinn.
Mm-mm.
Have you?
No.
Okay. Yeah, it's a long book. I don't, unless you're a big fan of history. I don't. It's a long read. It's a good read, but if you're not really into history, it might not be for you. But it does. The whole book is about. You learn about the history, the general history of like wars and certain events and certain policies and all these things, certain key events across U.S. history. But that book goes into the people struggle, right? The people struggle. Like it doesn't tell this romantic story of the United States. It tells about the dirty little secret that you're not going to learn in your high school U.S. history class, right? Because it talks about how the Native Americans were treated. It talks about the slavery. It talks about the Union busters and how many people died during unionization, after the first industrial wave, and then all military interventionism that happened from Theodore Roosevelt to, all these things. So that really shaped my perspective, and it's not that I don't love this country. I actually really do love this country, but and I critique. I just critique. If I see something I'm not okay with, I'm not gonna critique outright, but I'm gonna start critiquing in my head. I'm gonna start thinking like, what's wrong with this picture?
Yeah, sure. What's the name of that book?
It's called A People's History of the United States by Howard Zinn.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure you can find like a Cliff Notes or something like that. They're I've seen a lot of ads for it here on TikTok actually. They are actually selling it through TikTok Shop, believe it or not.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. And so that's and again, like I the Democrats were supposed to be the compassionate party, but I will critique them too. I think they're also the inefficient party. They are also the inefficient party when it comes to trying to fix these issues. So
Yeah, definitely.
yeah. But I think I'm gonna end this live right now just because I don't want to go as late as we did the other last night.
Okay, that's cool, man. I'll catch you around.
Yeah, of course. And yeah, dude, like we should continue having these thought-provoking conversations, man.
Yeah, I'll see you later.
All right, bro. Take care.